What if the secret to success isn't your IQ, your charm, or even sheer luck, but something far more nuanced, more powerful, and far less understood? What if it's your ability to walk into a room and see people not just for who they appear to be, but for who they really are? To read them like a story unfolding in real time, their insecurities, their intentions, their silent cues, and to respond with clarity, purpose, and presence. This isn't a dream, it's a skill, and it's the one that changes everything. Social Intelligence, the art of reading and responding to people, the book you're about to hear, isn't just a manual, it's a transformation. One that reveals the invisible force shaping your influence, your relationships, your leadership, and your ability to thrive in any social landscape. And here, in the voice of Booksounds' Better You, you're invited to step into a world most people only ever glimpse. Imagine being able to walk into any environment, a boardroom, a dinner party, a negotiation, a first date, and instantly feel the undercurrents. Who holds the power? Who's masking anxiety with a smile? Who's waiting to be heard? And more importantly, knowing exactly how to meet each moment with the right words, the right posture, the right energy. That skill, right there, is social intelligence. And if you're not actively building it, you're already at a disadvantage. Because in a world overloaded with information but aching for genuine connection, this is the new edge. Machines can replicate knowledge. Algorithms can mimic efficiency, but no line of code can truly understand another human being. Not the way we can, when we know how. Yet most of us were never taught this. We grew up learning how to solve equations, write essays, memorize facts. But we weren't taught how to interpret a sigh in the middle of a sentence, how to recognize discomfort behind someone's enthusiasm, or how to sense when silence means more than words. So we stumble, we misread, we overtalk, we withdraw, we feel out of sync with the people around us and can't quite put our finger on why. Here's the truth. Intelligence will only get you so far. Emotional sensitivity helps, but it's incomplete. The real game changer? The ability to read others with precision, to adapt without losing yourself, to influence without force. That's social intelligence, the silent engine behind trust, charisma, leadership, and connection. Let's clear something up right now. Social intelligence is not the same thing as emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is internal. It's about understanding your own emotional patterns and regulating them. It's your inner compass. But social intelligence? That's external. It's relational. It's about tuning into others, what they're feeling, what they're hiding, what they're hoping you don't notice, and knowing what to do with that knowledge. It's the reason why some people can walk into a room and command it without saying a word. It's why certain leaders draw fierce loyalty while others struggle to gain respect. It's why some individuals build networks that elevate their lives and careers, while others remain stuck, unseen, and unheard. And here's the twist. This isn't magic. It's not an innate gift only the charming or extroverted are born with. It's a skill, and just like playing an instrument or learning a language, it can be studied, practiced, and mastered. This book isn't about surface-level tricks or empty feel-good advice. It's about the mechanics, the structure underneath the intuition. You'll learn how to read the room, how to respond with impact, how to navigate people at their most human. You'll understand why some interactions leave you energized, while others leave you drained or confused. And you'll finally have the tools to turn those dynamics in your favor. We'll explore the frameworks that help you thrive, not just survive, in meetings, relationships, interviews, and high-pressure conversations. You'll uncover the unspoken rules that govern connection and trust, the kind of patterns that play out every day in your life, whether you notice them or not. Through these chapters, you'll discover how to build instant rapport, how to spot the warning signs in difficult personalities, how to decode emotions from the smallest facial movements, and how to communicate in ways that disarm defensiveness, generate respect, and inspire action. We'll step into some of the highest stakes moments, arguments, dates, power plays, negotiations, and we'll break down exactly what those with high social intelligence do differently. You'll see what cues they notice, how they hold their ground, how they lead without dominating. You'll explore the signals we all respond to, but few of us consciously recognize. You'll understand how social power operates in groups, teams, and entire organizations, and how to position yourself in those dynamics with subtle authority. You'll study both verbal and nonverbal communication, vocal tone, pacing, body posture, and even micro-expressions that flash for less than a second, but say more than entire paragraphs. And you'll walk away with techniques that make you not just more socially confident, but socially fluent. But here's something else you should know. Once you begin this process, you'll start to see the world differently. You'll start hearing what people really mean, not just what they say. You'll notice patterns in behavior you missed before. You'll recognize fear disguised as arrogance, insecurity cloaked in jokes, and manipulation behind smiles. You'll start to feel the emotional undercurrent of conversations, what's really going on underneath. And suddenly, you won't be guessing anymore. You'll know. This book was written for people who are ready to stop shrinking in social situations, for those tired of feeling awkward, misunderstood, or invisible, for anyone who wants to speak and be heard, connect without effort, and move through the world with quiet confidence and clarity. Whether you're naturally outgoing or more reserved, whether you're climbing the ladder or building a fresh start, this isn't about changing your personality. It's about unlocking your most effective self, the one who sees clearly, connects deeply, and communicates powerfully. And in this world, that's not optional anymore. That's essential. So here's the question. What if, by the end of this book, you could walk into any situation and instinctively know how to build trust, how to connect with anyone, and how to influence outcomes, not by force, but by presence? What if that confidence you've always wanted wasn't something you had to fake, but something you earned, one insight at a time? If even a part of you is curious, if something inside you is saying yes, then keep going. What's ahead won't just sharpen your skills. It will expand your entire way of seeing people and being seen. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Social Brain. What if I told you that before you learned your first word, before you ever understood right from wrong, your brain was already scanning faces, searching for warmth, safety, approval? What if the deepest part of you, the part that determines how you connect, lead, love, and influence, wasn't built on intellect, but on interaction? Long before we had language, before we had nations or philosophies or rules, we had each other. And that, our ability to sense one another, to read between gestures, to interpret a glance or a pause, that was everything. In fact, it still is. Beneath every decision you make, every relationship you nurture or neglect, every success or struggle in communication, lies one driving force: your social brain. You were born into relationship, not just biologically dependent, but neurologically wired to connect. From your earliest moments, your brain began constructing an intricate map of human behavior: how to recognize a comforting voice when a gaze meant danger or delight, how to earn affection, how to avoid rejection. These weren't choices. They were instincts. And those instincts live in every one of us, still shaping how we operate in the world, often without our awareness. This isn't a poetic notion. It's science. Human brains, more than any species on Earth, are designed for social complexity. We don't just think, we feel others thinking. We don't just hear words, we absorb tone, detect hesitation, notice shifts in posture. Every interaction is decoded by a vast network of neural circuits built for one purpose: understanding people. That system is what we now call the social brain. Think of it this way: your brain is not a solitary machine working in isolation. It's a social organ, tuned moment by moment to the signals and rhythms of the people around you. When you walk into a meeting and sense tension before anyone speaks, that's your social brain. When a friend tells you they're fine, but something in their voice betrays the truth, that's your social brain again. Every single day, you rely on this internal guidance system more than you realize. From choosing your words to sensing when to speak or stay silent, from reading a room to knowing how to console a grieving colleague, it's not guesswork. It's biology in action. But how did we get here? How did our brains evolve to carry this extraordinary capacity? The answer stretches back millions of years. In the wild, survival wasn't a solo endeavor. Early humans were vulnerable. No claws, no fur, no built-in armor. But we had each other. Tribes that bonded, shared, and cooperated stood a far better chance than loners. Over time, evolution rewarded those who could read intentions, detect threats and expressions, and respond with empathy or strategy. This survival advantage etched itself into our neural architecture. Whole regions of the brain, such as the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the insula, grew in size and specialization to meet the demands of an increasingly social world. Among the most astonishing discoveries in neuroscience are mirror neurons, cells that fire not only when we perform an action, but when we observe someone else doing it. You watch a child fall and instinctively wince. You see someone crying and feel your own chest tighten. That's not sympathy. That's neural empathy, your brain literally experiencing another's experience. This is the basis of shared understanding. It's how trust is built. It's how culture, parenting, friendship, and leadership work. These mirror neurons serve as the foundation of what we call social intelligence, the ability to intuit emotion, anticipate reaction, and respond with nuance. Central to this entire process is the prefrontal cortex, the CEO of your social life. It governs decision-making, self-regulation, and future planning. But in social contexts, it's the voice in your head that says, "Now isn't the time to say that," or "Smile here. It'll ease the tension." It helps you pause before reacting, calculate risk in relationships, and weigh long-term outcomes against short-term impulses. When you meet someone for the first time, your prefrontal cortex lights up. It evaluates tone, facial expressions, posture. It makes rapid assessments about trust, competence, warmth, and status. And it does this almost instantly, feeding you the signals you act on without even knowing why. And while the prefrontal cortex is running the play, the amygdala is watching the scoreboard. This tiny almond-shaped cluster sits deep in the brain, constantly scanning for emotional salience. It tells you when someone is safe or not. It senses the difference between a genuine laugh and forced politeness. It flares up when someone yells or threatens, but it also hums softly when someone you love walks into the room. Crucially, the amygdala doesn't just trigger fear. It helps form emotional memories. It connects people and places to feelings. That's why you may feel uneasy around someone without recalling exactly why. The amygdala remembered a frown, a tone, a betrayal, and filed it away for future use. Then, deep beneath the folds of the cortex, sits the insula, often overlooked but essential. This is where the body and the emotions meet. The insula processes the felt sense of another person's emotional state. When someone is heartbroken and you feel it in your own body, that wave of sorrow or tension, you're experiencing the insula in action. It's the cornerstone of empathy, not intellectual understanding, but physical resonance. The insula helps us recognize suffering, joy, disgust, or tenderness, not as distant ideas, but as internal sensations. And from those sensations, we decide how to respond, with kindness, patience, or withdrawal. Together, these regions form an elegant, adaptive system, a kind of social GPS, guiding you through the subtleties of every conversation, every team dynamic, every dinner table silence. And while we often think of intelligence as measured in logic or numbers, the truth is, this type of intelligence, social intelligence, is far more predictive of success in leadership, relationships, and even happiness. You might be wondering, if we all have these neural tools, why do some people seem to naturally connect while others struggle? The answer isn't ability, it's awareness and use. Just like muscles, these social circuits strengthen through use, through intentional reflection, and through learning. Some people were fortunate enough to grow up in emotionally attuned environments where cues were modeled clearly and safely. Others had to learn through missteps, pain, or exclusion. But wherever you're starting from, here's the truth that matters. Social intelligence is not fixed. Your brain can be rewired. Your presence can be reshaped. Your connection to others can deepen profoundly. The social brain isn't just about external navigation. It's about internal liberation. When you understand the signals you're receiving and the ones you're sending, you begin to communicate with clarity, not confusion. You gain the freedom to be present, the power to choose your responses, and the confidence to belong without pretending. And maybe, most importantly, you develop the courage to connect authentically, knowing that your brain, your biology, and your entire evolutionary story are on your side. What would happen if you stopped misreading people, not just occasionally, but every day? How many relationships could be repaired? How many opportunities would no longer pass you by unnoticed? You were born with this map inside you, a design etched by time, struggle, and survival. Now that you see it, now that you feel its truth in every conversation, every look, every silence, what might change? Maybe not the world, but your world? Absolutely. And that is where transformation begins. Chapter 2. The nature of empathy. Empathy is often misunderstood as a soft emotion, an optional trait to be admired but not necessarily cultivated. But that perspective falls short of what empathy actually is and what it makes possible. At its core, empathy is one of the most advanced capacities of the human mind. It is not weakness. It is power. The kind of power that doesn't seek to control others but connects them. That doesn't dominate conversation but transforms it. That doesn't shout over differences but listens through them. Empathy is more than a warm feeling or a sympathetic glance. It is a process, a profound one, that engages both the heart and the mind. It is what allows us to mentally step out of our own experiences and temporarily inhabit someone else's emotional world. When empathy is present, we can feel joy that's not ours, grieve pain we've never personally endured, and offer comfort to someone even when we can't fix what hurts. This capacity is essential to human connection. It's the invisible thread that binds people together in relationships, families, teams, and societies. Without empathy, there is no trust. Without trust, there is no real communication, only transaction, performance, or silence. Empathy is what turns communication into communion. But empathy doesn't always come naturally. It must be understood before it can be developed. And understanding empathy means seeing its dual structure. Because it is not a single impulse, it's a combination of two distinct, equally important forms: emotional empathy and cognitive empathy. Emotional empathy is automatic. When we see someone cry, it pulls at us. When someone celebrates, it uplifts us. This is the body's reflexive response to emotion in others, a spontaneous resonance that allows us to feel what someone else is feeling, as if their emotion were echoing inside us. It's physical, it's immediate. It's what draws people together in vulnerability and solidarity. Cognitive empathy, on the other hand, requires perspective. It is the ability to understand what someone is going through, even if we don't personally feel the same way. It involves recognition, not replication. You may not feel grief when listening to someone describe a personal loss, but cognitive empathy enables you to comprehend the weight of their experience. It allows you to validate emotions without being overtaken by them. Both forms of empathy serve different but equally vital purposes. Emotional empathy builds emotional bonds. It says, "You're not alone." Cognitive empathy builds psychological insight. It says, "I understand where you're coming from." In the real world, the most effective communicators and connectors are those who can access both, who feel enough to care and think enough to act wisely. The depth of empathy becomes even more apparent when examined through the lens of neuroscience. Empathy is not just a human virtue. It's a neurobiological process supported by specific regions of the brain. Understanding how empathy is wired into us adds dimension to its importance and explains why it's a cornerstone of social intelligence. The insula is one such region, situated deep within the brain. This area is central to our perception of internal bodily states, both our own and those we infer in others. It lights up when we see someone else in pain or distress, creating a mirrored sensation in our bodies. It's not imagination, it's neural reflection. This is why witnessing someone's suffering can physically hurt, or why their relief can bring us a sense of calm. Another key player is the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC. This structure helps us regulate emotional reactions to what we perceive. While the insula alerts us to another's emotional state, the ACC makes sure we don't become overwhelmed by it. It's the brain's way of balancing emotional empathy with self-regulation. Without this filter, our empathy could spiral into distress, rendering us less able to respond constructively. And then there are mirror neurons, perhaps the most fascinating discovery related to social behavior. These neurons fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing it. If you see someone trip, your mirror neurons mimic the sensation. If someone laughs, they activate as if you're the one laughing. Mirror neurons are the reason emotions are contagious, and they form the biological foundation for both feeling and understanding the emotional lives of others. These systems are not theoretical. They are hardwired. They operate whether we're aware of them or not. But by understanding their function, we can begin to use empathy more intentionally. Instead of being swept away by emotion, we can direct it. Instead of suppressing feeling, we can shape it into something constructive. Empathy isn't passive. It plays a central role in behavior. When we feel connected to others through either form of empathy, we are more likely to act in ways that benefit not just ourselves, but those around us. Psychologists call these behaviors prosocial, helping, supporting, collaborating, forgiving. But these actions don't stem from abstract morals. They arise because empathy gives us a stake in someone else's experience. Their pain becomes ours. Their dignity becomes personal. This is why empathy is essential in conflict resolution, not because it avoids confrontation, but because it creates understanding. When we pause long enough to consider how another person feels, not just what they said, but what they meant, we move the conversation from adversarial to human. Disagreements don't evaporate, but they evolve. They shift from battles to bridges. Relationships flourish under the influence of empathy. In its presence, communication becomes safer. Misunderstandings are less likely to escalate. People feel seen and heard. And when that happens consistently, trust takes root. It's no exaggeration to say that the presence of empathy is one of the greatest predictors of emotional intimacy in friendships, partnerships, families, and beyond. But empathy is not without its limits. There are moments when it feels too heavy to carry, when the pain of others seeps in and begins to deplete our own reserves. This state, known as empathic distress or compassion fatigue, often affects people in helping professions, but it can show up in anyone who gives more emotionally than they're able to replenish. Empathy can also falter in the face of difference. When we encounter people whose experiences, values, or identities diverge sharply from our own, the natural resonance of empathy can weaken. We tend to empathize more easily with those who look like us, sound like us, live like us. This tendency creates what psychologists call empathy gaps, distances that prevent us from connecting across lines of race, culture, class, or ideology. This is where cognitive empathy becomes not just useful, but necessary. When feeling doesn't come easily, effort must step in. We must make the deliberate choice to understand, to imagine, to inquire, to stretch beyond our assumptions. Empathy, in these moments, becomes an act of will, and that effort can be transformative. Empathy is not fixed at birth. It can be cultivated. It grows in those who practice it. And the path to cultivating empathy begins with presence. When we truly listen to someone, with our attention fully on them, without rehearsing our reply or waiting for a pause, we open a space where empathy can emerge naturally. Another way to deepen empathy is through perspective taking. This practice involves actively stepping outside our worldview to consider someone else's. It means asking, not assuming. It means acknowledging that we may not know the whole story and being willing to learn it. Lastly, empathy is strengthened through self-awareness. Our ability to connect with others is often shaped by our relationship with our own emotions. When we're disconnected from what we feel, we're less likely to recognize those emotions in others. But when we know how grief feels in our own body, we know how to be with someone in theirs. Empathy is the force that softens edges, opens doors, and redefines what's possible between people. It is not an accessory in communication. It is the architecture. It shapes how we respond, how we lead, how we repair, and how we grow. You don't need to feel everything. You don't need to have lived someone else's life to care about their pain or honor their joy. You only need the willingness to understand, the courage to remain present, and the wisdom to know that empathy is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength. Because in the moments where understanding seems impossible, empathy is what keeps us human. And being deeply compassionately human is the most powerful thing we can ever become. Chapter 3: The Power of Nonverbal Communication. We often think of communication as a matter of words, what we say, how we phrase it, how we explain, convince, clarify, or comfort through language. But the truth is, words alone are rarely what make us feel understood. Beneath every sentence we speak lies a much deeper language, one we began learning before we could even speak. That language is nonverbal communication, and it tells more about who we are, how we feel, and what we mean than any sentence ever could. Scientists estimate that over 90% of what we communicate to others is nonverbal. This includes facial expressions, gestures, posture, eye contact, tone of voice, and even the physical space between us. These subtle signals speak a language all their own, sometimes affirming our words, sometimes contradicting them, but always transmitting something. What makes nonverbal communication so powerful is that it bypasses conscious thought. You don't need to analyze someone's words to know if they're angry. You feel it in their tone, in the way their body tenses, in the narrowed gaze or clipped pace of their speech. These cues travel faster than logic. They arrive like emotional data, processed instantly and often unconsciously by the social brain. This deeper layer of interaction shapes how we connect, whether we're building trust in a professional relationship or trying to comfort someone we love. In many cases, what's unspoken determines the outcome more than anything we say. A single gesture can establish rapport. A glance can shatter it. And when what we say doesn't match how we say it, people believe the nonverbal every time. Our brains are exquisitely sensitive to nonverbal cues. Without realizing it, we constantly scan for microexpressions, shifts in posture, changes in voice tone, and patterns of movement. We interpret these cues to assess safety, sincerity, authority, or vulnerability. We form impressions not only from the content of speech, but from the delivery, the pacing, pitch, rhythm, and presence behind the words. The face, in particular, acts as a real-time emotional canvas. Tiny muscles around the eyes, forehead, and mouth work in unison to display emotions, some intentional, many automatic. These expressions are so deeply human that they cross cultural boundaries. A smile, a frown, a look of surprise or fear, these are universally recognized, hardwired into our species as tools for emotional exchange. But while the face may reveal emotion, the body often reveals intention. The way someone stands, leans, gestures, or moves through space provides continuous feedback about what they feel, think, or need. Open posture suggests ease, confidence, or receptivity. Tense shoulders or crossed arms may suggest defensiveness or withdrawal. Even subtle things, like whether someone tilts toward or away from you, can signal closeness, discomfort, or power dynamics. The hands, often overlooked, are also expressive instruments. We use them to emphasize points, to invite, to signal, to shield. Some gestures are learned through culture, while others are universal. But all of them carry emotional tone. Nervous people fidget, confident people gesture with purpose, and people in distress often restrict their movements, creating a visible pause in their nonverbal rhythm. Then there's eye contact, perhaps the most intimate of nonverbal acts. Eyes can convey interest, dominance, affection, or anxiety. A sustained gaze can feel connecting or intimidating, depending on context. Avoiding eye contact can reflect discomfort, guilt, shyness, or cultural conditioning. We read eyes instinctively, seeking truth in their stillness or movement, searching for presence or disconnection behind them. But nonverbal communication is not limited to the face and body. Our voices carry rich emotional cues, even when the words themselves are neutral. The volume, pitch, pace, and timbre of a person's voice reveal excitement, calm, irritation, authority, or unease. A sentence spoken flatly conveys something different than the same sentence spoken with rising inflection or trembling tone. The music of speech matters as much as the lyrics. What makes these signals so significant is that they emerge from the same biological systems that govern emotional regulation and social awareness. The amygdala, our emotional alert center, processes nonverbal cues with astonishing speed, often before we're even aware of them. It helps us assess threats, recognize emotional states, and adjust our behavior accordingly. The prefrontal cortex, meanwhile, helps us interpret these cues in context. It allows us to regulate our responses, choose appropriate actions, and balance empathy with discernment. When someone's posture suggests discomfort, our prefrontal cortex evaluates what that might mean in the given moment. Is this person tired, annoyed, afraid, or simply introverted? That subtle judgment then shapes how we respond, offering space, reassurance, or engagement. Another powerful contributor is the insula, the region responsible for mapping internal sensations, both ours and those we perceive in others. It is central to emotional empathy, helping us mirror another person's state based on their posture, tone, or expression. The insula helps us feel what others feel, and that feeling becomes the foundation for authentic, meaningful connection. All these processes happen quickly, unconsciously, and continuously. Whether in a job interview, a conversation with a friend, or a moment of conflict with a partner, our brain is decoding the emotional landscape in real time. And just as we read others, they are reading us. Every movement, every glance, every shift in tone is sending a message, inviting connection, signaling confidence, expressing doubt, or revealing inner tension. In high-trust relationships, these cues align. A person's words match their tone, their face reflects sincerity, and their posture invites openness. But when nonverbal and verbal signals clash, when someone says "I'm fine" while looking away and folding their arms, we sense the dissonance, and that dissonance erodes trust. Nonverbal communication is also what allows rapport to emerge. When two people synchronize their gestures, pace, tone, or posture, a phenomenon called mirroring, it often leads to a sense of emotional alignment. We feel in sync, sometimes without knowing why. This mirroring is not manipulation, it's a natural part of human interaction. It reflects our desire for resonance and understanding. More importantly, nonverbal alignment builds credibility. When our words are supported by congruent facial expressions, body language, and vocal tone, others perceive us as authentic. The alignment sends a message that says, "You can trust me. What I'm saying reflects who I am." Improving nonverbal communication doesn't require mastering a set of artificial gestures or trying to imitate someone else's style. It begins with awareness. By becoming more conscious of the signals we send and receive, we open ourselves to deeper connection. This requires attention. Attention to how we show up in space, how we listen, how we look at others, how we carry ourselves when we're speaking or being silent. It also requires humility, because we don't always get it right. Sometimes our posture closes without our knowing. Our tone tightens when we're anxious. Our gaze wanders when we're afraid. But the more aware we become, the more we can align our outer signals with our inner truth. And that alignment is where real communication begins. Nonverbal intelligence is not about decoding people like puzzles. It's about noticing, responding, being present. It's about learning to listen with your eyes, speak with your posture, and lead with the signals that invite others to feel safe, seen, and respected. Every moment you spend with someone, you're speaking, even when no words are said. The way you look at them, the way you sit beside them, the way your voice rises or softens, these are the messages they'll remember. Long after the words fade, what stays is how you made them feel. And what made them feel that way was what you didn't say. Mastering nonverbal communication is not about saying more. It's about saying what matters most without needing to speak at all. Chapter 4: Emotional Intelligence and its Role in Social Interactions. Emotional intelligence has quietly become one of the most defining forces behind meaningful human connection. While we often measure intelligence by what we know or how fast we can solve problems, there is another, more nuanced kind of intelligence at play in every interaction. This isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being the most attuned, the most self-aware, the most human. Emotional intelligence, often abbreviated as EQ, is the ability to recognize and understand your own emotions, and just as importantly, to recognize and respond to the emotions of others. It involves an ongoing awareness of what you're feeling and why, and it enables you to manage those emotions in ways that are constructive rather than reactive. But EQ goes beyond just managing yourself. It also empowers you to read the emotional landscape around you, to pick up on what someone else is feeling, even when they haven't said a word. Unlike cognitive intelligence, which focuses on logic, memory, and analytical thinking, emotional intelligence governs how we relate to others, how we handle conflict, how we build trust, and how we navigate the often unspoken world of emotions that lies beneath every conversation. At its heart, EQ is not just a skill, it's the foundation of how we live in community with one another. The framework of emotional intelligence includes several key elements, each one building on the next to create a kind of internal compass that guides our behavior. The first and perhaps most essential is self-awareness. This is where emotional intelligence begins, your ability to observe your internal world without judgment. When you are self-aware, you're not just feeling an emotion. You're recognizing it. You can name it. You can trace where it came from. And you can understand how it's shaping your words, your tone, your posture, even your decision-making. People with strong self-awareness don't ignore their emotions or let them rule unchecked. Instead, they create space between stimulus and response. They recognize that being upset doesn't mean lashing out, that feeling anxious doesn't require shutting down. They ask themselves, what am I feeling right now, and what does this feeling want from me? And in doing so, they bring mindfulness into moments that might otherwise be driven by habit or impulse. Closely tied to self-awareness is self-regulation, the ability to manage and adjust your emotions in healthy ways. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions or pretending not to feel. Rather, it means creating stability in the face of emotional turbulence. When someone says something offensive, self-regulation stops you from immediately retaliating. When a difficult conversation threatens to unravel, it gives you the clarity to stay grounded. It's what enables you to respond instead of react. Those who master self-regulation tend to bring a calming presence into emotionally charged environments. They aren't necessarily the loudest or most assertive, but they have a quiet power, the ability to maintain perspective when others lose theirs. They don't deny emotion, they harness it. Then there's motivation, the internal drive to pursue goals not out of obligation or fear, but because they align with your deeper values. Emotionally intelligent individuals tend to exhibit a kind of purposeful energy. They're not necessarily immune to discouragement, but they're resilient. They bounce back. They keep showing up even when the path forward is unclear, because they have a reason bigger than comfort or ego guiding them. This sense of internal motivation is contagious. People who are deeply in touch with their own purpose tend to inspire that clarity in others. They remind us what it looks like to care, to persevere, to strive without losing sight of what matters most. As emotional intelligence expands outward, it takes the form of empathy, the ability to tune in to what someone else is feeling and to connect with that emotion in a way that says, you're not alone. Empathy isn't about agreeing with someone or fixing their problems. It's about being present with their experience. Empathy allows us to recognize pain beneath anger, insecurity beneath arrogance, fear behind silence. It softens our judgments. It shifts our questions from what's wrong with them to what might they be going through. Empathy helps us see people not as obstacles or opponents, but as layered, complex beings trying to make it through their own emotional weather. And when empathy is combined with strong communication, it blossoms into social skill, the practical expression of emotional intelligence in everyday interaction. Social skill is what allows us to resolve conflict with grace, to influence without manipulation, to collaborate without dominance. It's what enables us to have hard conversations without hardening ourselves. Emotionally intelligent people tend to navigate group dynamics with ease, not because they dominate the room, but because they read it. They sense when to speak and when to listen. They adjust their tone and timing based on the mood of the moment. They're the ones who lift a tense meeting with a well-timed gesture, who soothe a friend not just with words, but with silence that feels safe. All of these elements, self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skill, work together to shape how we experience the world and how the world experiences us. They determine whether our relationships deepen or fray, whether we're perceived as trustworthy or temperamental, whether we rise to leadership or repel it. In social situations, emotional intelligence becomes our inner radar. It helps us detect subtle shifts in tone, body language, and expression. It allows us to respond not just to the content of someone's message, but to the emotional message underneath. For instance, when someone says, "I'm fine," EQ prompts us to listen beyond the words and ask, "But how are you really?" Without emotional intelligence, we may find ourselves misunderstanding others, misreading intentions, or mishandling fragile conversations. We may speak too soon, listen too little, react too strongly, or hold back when empathy is what's needed most. But with EQ, we gain a kind of superpower, the ability to show up in ways that build trust, resolve tension, and leave people feeling heard. Empathy especially transforms our interactions. It takes us beyond surface-level exchanges and invites people into genuine connection. Empathy is what allows someone to cry without shame, to express fear without being dismissed, to ask for help without feeling weak. When we bring empathy into a conversation, we give others permission to be real. And in that honesty, something deeper is born: mutual respect, safety, and understanding. In professional settings, this emotional presence often separates good leaders from great ones. Not because great leaders always have the answers, but because they create environments where people feel valued and seen. They don't just manage work, they manage energy. They tune in to emotional undercurrents and adjust their leadership accordingly. Whether in boardrooms or living rooms, emotional intelligence is what makes the difference between communication that merely exchanges words and communication that builds bridges. It doesn't eliminate conflict, but it changes the way conflict unfolds. It turns confrontation into collaboration. It creates the space where truth can be spoken and heard. You can't always control what people say to you. You can't always predict how life will test your patience, your confidence, or your peace. But you can control how deeply you understand yourself. You can choose to see others not just as noise in your day, but as reflections of emotion, need, and meaning. When you develop emotional intelligence, you stop surviving social moments and start transforming them. And in doing so, you become not just more connected, but more powerful. The kind of power that begins within and radiates through every interaction. Emotional intelligence continues to shape our experience in powerful and practical ways, especially when it comes to managing conflict and building lasting connections. As interactions become more layered and nuanced, our ability to respond with emotional awareness often determines the difference between creating connection or fueling misunderstanding. Conflict is a natural part of all human relationships, personal or professional. It arises not because people are inherently difficult, but because emotions, values, expectations, and communication styles often collide. What makes the difference is not the absence of disagreement, but how people respond when tension builds. This is where emotional intelligence becomes essential. Individuals with strong EQ have the tools to remain grounded in the middle of emotional storms. They don't allow frustration or pride to dictate their responses. Instead, they recognize the emotions rising within them and choose a calm, measured approach. They take time to understand different perspectives and respond with empathy, rather than reacting out of anger or fear. This ability to de-escalate conflict is not about being passive. It's about being intentional. Emotionally intelligent individuals are able to guide conversations away from blame and toward resolution. They know when to listen, when to pause, and when to express themselves in a way that invites understanding rather than resistance. On the other hand, those who lack emotional intelligence may default to defensiveness or aggression, often escalating situations instead of resolving them. Their reactions tend to be reactive, impulsive, and emotionally charged, pushing others away and compounding the original conflict. By managing our emotional responses during disagreements, we open the door to respectful dialogue and collaboration. Emotional regulation makes room for deeper insight, and it allows all parties involved to feel heard and respected. This, in turn, lays the foundation for stronger, more sustainable relationships. In every meaningful connection, whether with family, friends, partners, or coworkers, emotional intelligence becomes the thread that holds things together. Trust is built not just on consistency or shared experience, but on emotional safety. People gravitate toward those who can listen without judgment, who offer empathy without needing to fix or control, and who communicate authentically rather than reactively. These are the characteristics of someone who is emotionally aware and socially skillful. In the professional world, these same qualities can shape entire team dynamics and organizational cultures. Emotional intelligence directly impacts collaboration, leadership, communication, and stress management. Leaders with high EQ create more than just results. They create trust. They are able to motivate with purpose, resolve team tensions with grace, and inspire loyalty through their example. Their presence brings stability. They sense the emotional currents in their team and adjust their approach with wisdom rather than rigidity. Moreover, emotionally intelligent professionals are more adaptable in the face of challenge. Their resilience is rooted not in stubbornness, but in awareness. When things go wrong, They reflect instead of deflect. They acknowledge stress, regulate their response, and move forward with clarity. This emotional agility not only reduces burnout, but enhances performance across the board. One of the most valuable outcomes of emotional intelligence is its connection to mental and physical well-being. Multiple studies have shown that those with higher EQ tend to enjoy better relationships, more meaningful careers, and greater life satisfaction. They also experience lower levels of anxiety and depression. This isn't by accident. It's because emotional intelligence reduces internal chaos. When you can name your feelings, manage your impulses, and connect authentically with others, your internal world becomes less overwhelming. You are no longer ruled by reaction. Instead, you lead from intention. And beyond the emotional realm, the benefits extend to the body. Chronic stress, often caused by emotional reactivity or unresolved tension, contributes to a host of health issues, including high blood pressure, immune dysfunction, and heart disease. Emotional intelligence helps mitigate these effects. By managing our emotional states, we also manage the physiological responses tied to them. Our bodies benefit when our minds become more regulated. Leadership, too, is transformed by emotional intelligence. A strong leader isn't simply someone who drives performance. It's someone who creates emotional clarity within a group, who notices when morale dips, who responds to unspoken tension, who brings out the best in others by connecting with what they need, not just what they do. This kind of leadership builds teams that trust one another, communicate more openly, and recover from challenges with greater unity. Even outside formal leadership roles, emotional intelligence helps us network more effectively, build rapport faster, and maintain relationships longer. It helps us pick up on social cues, adjust our tone when needed, and engage others in ways that are authentic rather than performative. It gives us the social awareness to read a room, the empathy to understand motives, and the self-awareness to know when to speak or when to stay silent. Fortunately, emotional intelligence is not something we either have or don't have. It's a skill set that can be cultivated over time. It begins with self-awareness, paying close attention to our emotional patterns, identifying what triggers us, and understanding the impact of our behavior on others. Through daily reflection or journaling, we can track our emotional responses and gradually shift from unconscious reaction to conscious choice. Emotional regulation comes next. Practices like mindfulness, breathwork, and grounding techniques allow us to pause before reacting. Over time, we develop the muscle to stay calm in chaos, not by suppressing emotions, but by learning to feel them without letting them take control. This creates space for thoughtful action, even in emotionally charged moments. Empathy grows as we shift our focus outward. Through active listening and perspective taking, we begin to recognize the unspoken emotions behind someone's words. We learn to listen, not to reply, but to understand. This shift in mindset changes how people feel around us. Safer, more open, more willing to connect. Social skills, such as effective communication, conflict resolution, and collaboration, are the final layer. These are the daily expressions of emotional intelligence in action. They allow us to translate internal awareness into external impact, bridging the gap between insight and relationship. Ultimately, emotional intelligence becomes the hidden strength behind every successful relationship, conversation, and interaction. It's what allows us to respond to life's challenges with clarity. It's what helps us build trust, connection, and community. And most importantly, it's what helps us become not just smarter or more capable, but more human. As you grow in emotional intelligence, you won't just see changes in how others relate to you. You'll feel it in your own sense of peace. You'll notice that you're less reactive, more centered, and more connected to the world around you. And from that place, you'll be able to show up more powerfully for yourself, for your relationships, and for every moment that requires emotional courage. Chapter 5. Mastering the Art of Communication. Communication lies at the heart of every relationship, every opportunity, and every conflict we encounter. It's more than just the exchange of words. It's the foundation upon which trust is built, ideas are shared, and understanding is born. Without effective communication, even the best intentions can fall flat. Misunderstandings multiply, connections weaken, progress stalls. But with it, nearly anything becomes possible. To understand communication as a true art, we must first strip away the illusion that it's simply about speaking clearly or listening politely. Real communication is dynamic. It's layered, and it requires more than the ability to form sentences or nod at the right moment. It's about expressing emotions and intentions with clarity, while also tuning in deeply to what's being communicated back, both in words and in the silence between them. This two-way process is what gives communication its true power. It isn't just about saying what's on your mind. It's about delivering your message in a way that resonates, lands, and builds a bridge to the other person's reality. And that doesn't happen by accident. It takes presence, awareness, and emotional intelligence. In both personal and professional life, communication is often the silent determiner of success. The way you phrase a request can make the difference between collaboration and conflict. The way you respond to feedback can either deepen respect or close a door. Whether it's a conversation with a partner, a colleague, or a stranger, communication can either make people feel safe or misunderstood. At its core, communication involves not only speaking, but receiving. Not just transmitting, but interpreting. What's often overlooked is that communication doesn't rely on words alone. In fact, studies have repeatedly shown that the majority of our message is carried through nonverbal channels. While estimates vary, researchers suggest that as much as 93% of communication may be conveyed through tone, body language, facial expression, posture, and gestures, rather than the words themselves. Think about that. You could say the right words, but if your tone is cold or your posture is closed, the message gets lost. Communication isn't just heard, it's felt. That's why someone can say, "I'm fine," and yet leave you with the sinking feeling that they're anything but. It's why a warm glance can mean more than an elaborate explanation. Our bodies speak volumes, even when our mouths are silent. This interplay between verbal and nonverbal expression is what makes communication so complex and so powerful when mastered. When your words, tone, and body language are aligned, you create clarity, you build trust. But when they're out of sync, confusion follows. People pick up on the mismatch, and whether they know it consciously or not, it erodes credibility. To communicate effectively, then, is to become fully aware of all these elements, not just what you're saying, but how you're saying it, and how it's being received. That's where emotional intelligence plays an essential role. Emotionally intelligent individuals don't just speak, they notice. They read the room, they sense the mood, and they adjust. Not to manipulate, but to connect more deeply. In practical terms, this means slowing down and paying attention to what's happening in the moment. Are you listening actively, or just waiting for your turn to talk? Are you picking up on subtle shifts in tone, hesitation, or facial expressions? Or are you so focused on your message that you miss the emotional context altogether? Active listening is one of the most underrated yet transformative communication skills. It involves more than hearing the words. It's about receiving the speaker's full message, intellectual and emotional, and responding in a way that validates their experience. It requires presence, it requires empathy, and it requires discipline, especially in a world where distraction is constant. When you practice active listening, you show the other person that they matter. You signal that you're not just absorbing information, but engaging with it. This creates a ripple effect. People open up more, share more authentically, and trust more deeply. On the flip side, poor listening habits, interrupting, multitasking, or checking out, can instantly shut down connection. Even the most well-crafted words lose their impact if the listener feels dismissed. The three core elements that shape every message we deliver, words, tone, and body language, work together to either enhance or dilute meaning. Words are the most obvious part. They form the structure. But words also carry layers of meaning, depending on their phrasing, emotional charge, and cultural context. A word like fine can be affirming, sarcastic, passive-aggressive, or dismissive, depending on how it's used. That's why choosing words carefully is essential. It's not about being overly polished or formal. It's about understanding the impact of language, how it can soothe or sting, clarify or confuse. Being mindful of your vocabulary, your phrasing, and even your timing can transform how your message is received. Then there's tone, the emotional coloring of your voice. Your tone tells the listener whether you're excited, bored, frustrated, or sincere. It's how people sense your attitude behind the words. A warm, engaged tone can turn a correction into encouragement. A flat or dismissive tone can make even a compliment feel like an insult. Often, people will remember how something was said more vividly than what was said. And finally, body language. Your posture, facial expressions, eye contact, hand gestures, these are all part of the silent language that speaks louder than words. A slouched posture can suggest disengagement. Lack of eye contact can imply discomfort or dishonesty. A furrowed brow might signal confusion or concern. These signals add emotional context to your words, and they either support or contradict your message. When all three, words, tone, and body language, are in alignment, communication becomes powerful. It becomes clear, coherent, and connected. But when they're in conflict, even simple messages can become muddled. If you say, "I'm really excited to be here," with crossed arms and a monotone voice, no one believes you. Your nonverbal cues betray your actual feeling, and the impact is lost. Mastering the art of communication means becoming fluent in all three channels. Not just speaking clearly, but aligning your tone and body language with intention. It means learning to listen with presence, speak with awareness, and respond with emotional clarity. This is not about scripting every word or faking your emotions. It's about becoming more congruent, inside and out. The journey toward communication mastery doesn't end with knowing the mechanics. It deepens with practice, feedback, and humility. It means becoming more aware of how you show up in each interaction and taking responsibility not just for what you say, but for how it lands. In the next section, we'll explore how different communication styles influence our relationships, how to adapt your approach without losing authenticity, and how to navigate difficult conversations with confidence and grace. Because once you master communication, you don't just become a better speaker or listener. You become someone who truly understands and connects with the people around you. We often assume that what we say holds the most weight in our interactions, but in reality, it's how we say it and what we convey without saying anything at all that truly defines the depth and quality of our communication. Body language, often referred to as the silent voice of emotion, has the power to confirm, contradict, or even override the words we speak. When we communicate face-to-face, we are constantly sending and receiving messages through our physical presence. Facial expressions, posture, gestures, eye contact, and proximity, all of these components make up the rich, unspoken vocabulary of body language. It's a language we've been fluent in since infancy, long before we learned to speak. And whether we realize it or not, we read it every day in the expressions and movements of those around us. Body language reveals what's happening beneath the surface, what someone is really feeling, even when their words tell a different story. A warm smile can melt tension. Crossed arms can signal hesitation or defense. Steady eye contact can build trust, while darting eyes may cast doubt. Every gesture and movement tells a story, sometimes more honestly than speech ever could. This is why it's so important to become aware of the signals we send. When you're engaged in conversation, your body language should support your words, not fight against them. If you're offering empathy, but your arms are crossed and your eyes are wandering, your message is lost. But if you lean in, hold their gaze, and nod in understanding, you show that you're truly present, and that kind of presence builds trust like nothing else. Equally vital is the role of active listening, a skill that might seem passive, but is in fact one of the most powerful actions in communication. Active listening is not just hearing the words, it's listening with your entire being. It means you're not preparing your next sentence while someone is still speaking. You're not checking your phone or mentally drifting away. You're listening to understand, not just to reply. Active listening involves full presence. It requires you to notice not only what the speaker says, but how they say it, the tone, the pace, the emotion behind their voice. You observe their facial expressions, their posture, and the subtle shifts in their energy. When you do this, you're not just hearing, you're tuning into their world. And that creates something rare, a genuine connection. One of the most powerful things you can offer someone is the experience of being deeply heard. When people feel heard, they feel seen, they feel safe, and they open up. This kind of space is what allows real dialogue to happen, where both sides grow, understand, and walk away stronger. There are simple techniques that can help you become a more active listener. One is paraphrasing, restating what someone said in your own words. This confirms understanding and lets the speaker know you're with them. Another is summarizing, where you capture the key points of a conversation, reinforcing clarity. And of course, asking clarifying questions shows not only that you're engaged, but that you genuinely want to understand more deeply. But active listening isn't about following a formula. It's about intention. It's about putting your ego aside, letting go of distractions, and allowing someone else's perspective to matter just as much as your own. And when you do that, conversations become less about competition and more about connection. Now, when we revisit nonverbal communication, we begin to see that it is not simply a background element. It's the emotional canvas upon which all communication is painted. While your words might say, "I'm interested," your slouched shoulders and distant eyes may say otherwise. The numbers speak for themselves. Studies suggest that 93% of communication impact comes from nonverbal elements, with 55% rooted in body language and 38% in tone of voice, leaving only 7% to the actual words used. That statistic alone reshapes how we should think about communication. If we focus only on perfecting our verbal delivery but ignore the physical and emotional energy behind it, we miss most of what makes communication effective. Think of the difference between a genuine smile and a forced one. One softens the room, the other creates discomfort. Or imagine receiving a compliment from someone who won't meet your eyes. It doesn't land the same. Eye contact in particular is one of the most powerful forms of nonverbal communication. Sustained and sincere eye contact builds connection, respect, and trust. On the other hand, too little eye contact may signal avoidance, insecurity, or even deception. Our posture tells its own story. Leaning forward expresses engagement. An open stance suggests receptiveness. Meanwhile, turning away, crossing arms, or shrinking into ourselves sends the opposite message, often unintentionally. These cues become especially important in moments of tension, where what's unspoken carries even greater emotional weight. So how do we bring all of this together, verbal, nonverbal, emotional, and intentional, into a skill set we can actually use? It begins with awareness. You can't change what you don't notice. So start by observing your own communication patterns. How do you sound when you're tired? What does your posture say when you're bored? How often do you truly listen without distraction? Building awareness is the first step toward mastery. From there, the key is practice. Focus on one conversation each day where you are fully present. Just one. Make eye contact. Listen deeply. Match your words with your tone and posture. Watch how the interaction shifts, and repeat. When you begin to communicate from this space, present, intentional, congruent, something shifts not only in your relationships, but within yourself. You become more confident, more respected, and more connected. Communication no longer feels like a task. It becomes a tool for transformation. As you refine these skills, you'll notice subtle but profound changes. Conversations that once felt strained begin to flow. Misunderstandings fade. People lean in, engage more, and feel drawn to your presence. Not because you're louder or more polished, but because you're real. You're attuned. You're honest. And in today's noisy, disconnected world, that kind of communication isn't just effective, it's revolutionary. Mastering the art of communication is not about becoming a perfect speaker. It's about becoming an authentic one. It's about using every element of your being, words, tone, posture, energy, to create clarity, trust, and resonance. Whether you're building relationships, leading a team, or simply trying to understand someone you care about, these skills are your foundation. And in the next chapter, we'll take this one step further. Because once you've learned how to speak and listen with presence, the next challenge is mastering the conversations that matter most. Those that carry high emotion, high stakes, and the power to change everything. Chapter 6. The Power of Empathy in Communication. Empathy is not merely a virtue. It is the connective tissue of meaningful communication, the unseen force that transforms dialogue from mere exchange into emotional resonance. When we empathize, we don't just hear someone's words, we feel the heartbeat behind them. In a world often driven by speed, opinions, and performance, empathy invites us to pause, step out of ourselves, and enter the emotional landscape of another. This ability to understand and share in the feelings of others is far more than a soft skill. It is a cornerstone of emotional intelligence and one of the greatest determinants of our capacity to connect. It softens conflict, deepens trust, and helps us bridge the distance between differences. Without empathy, communication becomes a transaction, just words passing between strangers. But with it, even a quiet moment can become a sacred space of mutual understanding. Empathy isn't about feeling sorry for someone. That's sympathy. And while sympathy has its place, it often remains on the surface. Empathy dives deeper. It's about entering another person's emotional world without losing your footing in your own. It means listening, not just with your ears, but with your presence, tuning into the undercurrents beneath the words, where pain, hope, fear, or longing may quietly reside. Think of a time when someone truly got you, when they didn't try to fix your problem, outtalk your pain, or compare it to their own. They simply listened, understood, and stood with you in it. That's empathy in action. It creates a rare and powerful bond, and it can be one of the most healing forces in any human relationship. But empathy isn't passive. It's an active engagement of the heart and mind. It takes focus, humility, and a willingness to suspend judgment. It requires us to set aside our instinct to reply, correct, or relate it back to ourselves. Instead, we must lean in with curiosity and care and let someone else's reality take center stage for a moment. When we engage empathetically, we're not losing ourselves in another's emotions. We're expanding our emotional range to include them. It is this expansion that makes communication more authentic and relationships more resilient. Whether we're navigating a difficult conversation with a friend, resolving a conflict at work, or comforting a loved one in pain, empathy allows us to meet people where they are, emotionally, mentally, and even spiritually. Empathy also sharpens our social intelligence. It teaches us how to read emotional cues more clearly, how to respond with sensitivity rather than reactivity, and how to recognize what someone needs even when they don't say it outright. In this way, empathy doesn't just improve how we connect, it elevates how we live alongside others, from casual conversations to life-defining moments. So how do we begin cultivating empathy in a world that so often rewards speed over reflection and assertiveness over sensitivity? The first step is understanding that empathy is not one size fits all. In fact, there are two distinct but equally vital types of empathy: cognitive and emotional. Cognitive empathy is the ability to intellectually grasp what someone else is thinking and feeling. It's about perspective taking, putting yourself in another's shoes and seeing the world from their vantage point. This form of empathy is essential in situations that require diplomacy, negotiation, or collaboration. It allows us to engage thoughtfully with viewpoints we may not share and to navigate disagreements without dehumanizing one another. Imagine you're in a tense meeting and a colleague strongly opposes your idea. Rather than becoming defensive, cognitive empathy invites you to ask, why do they see it this way? What concerns might they have? This doesn't mean you have to agree, but it means you're willing to understand. And that understanding creates space for mutual respect and more productive dialogue. Cognitive empathy is especially powerful in professional settings. It helps us communicate effectively across cultural, generational, and ideological divides. It allows leaders to manage teams with compassion, marketers to speak to customers with insight, and educators to reach students with relevance. In short, it enables us to lead with awareness instead of assumption. But understanding someone's thoughts isn't always enough. Sometimes people don't need logic. They need your heart. That's where emotional empathy comes in. This type of empathy is about feeling with someone. It's the instinctive response you have when a friend cries and you feel your own chest tighten. Or when a child laughs and you can't help but smile. Emotional empathy is visceral. It bypasses words and touches something primal within us. Emotional empathy is the foundation of intimacy, vulnerability, and trust. In personal relationships, it's what allows us to show up not just physically, but emotionally. When someone is grieving, you don't need to have the right words. What matters most is that your presence says, I'm here. I feel this with you. Emotional empathy connects us on a level deeper than language. It says, you are not alone. And yet, emotional empathy also requires emotional boundaries. Feeling with someone doesn't mean becoming consumed by their pain or taking it on as your own. It means allowing yourself to resonate without drowning. This balance between connection and self-grounding is what makes empathy a skill as much as it is a gift. In truth, both cognitive and emotional empathy are essential. One helps us navigate the outer world of interaction with thoughtfulness and awareness. The other anchors us in the inner world of feeling, allowing us to respond with compassion and care. When they work together, they form the bedrock of emotionally intelligent communication. As we deepen our empathy, both in thought and feeling, we begin to communicate from a place of shared humanity. We no longer see others as them, but as part of us. And in that shift, something profound happens. Barriers dissolve, defenses soften, and true understanding emerges. This is the power of empathy in communication. Not just to help us speak or listen better, but to connect more deeply, lead more wisely, and live more compassionately. In a world that often prizes being right over being kind, empathy reminds us that the real magic of communication lies not in having the perfect words, but in having the heart to listen. Empathy, while beautiful and essential, is not always easy. In its emotional form, it calls us to not only understand, but to actually feel the emotions of others. And that kind of connection, raw, unfiltered, vulnerable, can be overwhelming. To truly walk with someone through their pain, joy, or uncertainty demands that we open ourselves up. But if we're not careful, it can also leave us emotionally exposed. That's why one of the most important lessons in practicing empathy is learning how to balance emotional resonance with emotional boundaries. Cognitive empathy, the ability to intellectually understand someone's experience, can help ground us when emotional empathy begins to feel like too much. Together, they form a partnership that allows us to care deeply without becoming consumed, to stay connected without losing ourselves. It's this delicate balance that allows empathy to remain a sustaining force in our lives, rather than a draining one. Empathy is not just a soft skill, it's the invisible architecture of trust and connection in every meaningful relationship. When you express true empathy, when someone looks into your eyes and feels genuinely seen and heard, something transformative happens. You create a safe emotional space, one where people don't need to guard their words, filter their feelings, or pretend to be something they're not. They can just be messy, honest, human. And in that rare space, trust begins to flourish. It becomes the soil from which deeper relationships grow. Trust, after all, is the foundation of every lasting relationship, and empathy is the mortar that holds that foundation together. When people feel truly understood, not just acknowledged, but deeply understood, they're far more likely to be open, vulnerable, and honest. On the other hand, when empathy is absent, communication tends to fragment. Misunderstandings multiply, walls go up. Conversations stay on the surface or dissolve into frustration. We might hear each other's words, but we don't feel each other's hearts. And that's where connection begins to wither. Empathy gives people something we all long for, the feeling that our inner world matters to someone else, that our feelings are valid, that our story deserves a witness. And when someone senses that you truly understand them, not because you have all the answers, but because you're willing to feel with them, it creates a powerful sense of belonging. It says, "You're not alone. I'm with you." This is particularly vital in our closest relationships, the ones where emotional intimacy isn't just a benefit, it's the lifeblood. In these bonds, empathy is what turns casual conversation into meaningful dialogue, what transforms arguments into breakthroughs, and what allows both people to be seen in their full humanity. It creates space for vulnerability, where we can let down our guards and open our hearts, knowing we will be met not with judgment, but with care. In the workplace, empathy can feel like a hidden superpower. It's not about becoming emotional in a boardroom. It's about being attuned. When colleagues sense that they matter as people, not just as roles or functions, it changes the entire dynamic. They become more willing to collaborate, more motivated to contribute, and more loyal to one another. The result? Teams that don't just work together, but thrive together. Creativity expands, conflict decreases, and a sense of shared humanity elevates everyone involved. And speaking of conflict, empathy can be one of the most effective tools we have for navigating it. When emotions are running high and positions feel entrenched, empathy has the power to soften the terrain. It invites us to shift our focus from being right to being understanding. It helps us see that beneath every disagreement is a story, a reason, a need. And when we're willing to explore those hidden layers, we can respond with compassion rather than criticism. We can recognize that sometimes what seems like resistance is actually fear. That anger might be masking hurt, that the louder someone speaks, the more unseen they may feel. When we understand those truths, we no longer need to fight. We can begin to heal. Still, empathy is not a switch we can flip. It's a practice, one that takes intention, awareness, and a willingness to stretch beyond our own perspective. Fortunately, like any skill, it can be developed. It starts by choosing, every day, to show up differently in our conversations, not just with words, but with presence. Not just with answers, but with curiosity. One of the simplest but most powerful ways to begin is through active listening, and not the kind of listening where we're quietly waiting for our turn to speak, but the kind where we are fully tuned in, heart and mind. It means listening without judgment, without the urge to fix or control. It means reading not only the words, but the emotion behind them, the tone, the posture, the silences in between. And when we listen like that, we send a powerful message. I care enough to slow down. I care enough to stay. Another way we deepen empathy is by imagining ourselves in the other person's shoes. Not just guessing at what they feel, but really trying to see the world from their vantage point. What might they be carrying? What history, what loss, what dreams live behind their eyes? This kind of mental and emotional shift opens the door to a more compassionate response, not out of obligation, but out of understanding. Then there's the simple act of validating emotion. You don't need the perfect response. You don't need to solve their pain. You only need to acknowledge it. A few words, spoken with sincerity, can shift an entire conversation. That sounds hard. I hear you. I can see why you'd feel that way. These phrases don't cost much, but they give others something priceless, the feeling that their feelings are real, respected, and safe to express. Of course, empathy demands presence. In a distracted world, giving someone our undivided attention is one of the rarest and most meaningful gifts we can offer. That means closing the laptop, turning the phone screen down, meeting someone's gaze without rush or multitasking. When we offer that kind of presence, people feel it. And when people feel it, they open up. Finally, empathy is not just about sensing someone's pain. It's about standing beside them in it. Offering a kind word, a supportive gesture, or a simple, steady presence that says, "You don't have to go through this alone." It's not about knowing exactly what to say. It's about showing up and staying, even when things are messy or unclear. But let's be honest, empathy isn't always easy. It can feel exhausting, especially when we ourselves are running on empty, or when we encounter people whose values or views feel foreign. That's why empathy must be paired with self-awareness. When you're emotionally depleted, it's okay to step back, to refill your own cup, to set boundaries that protect your well-being. Empathy isn't about self-sacrifice, it's about mutual care. And then there's bias, unconscious assumptions, cultural misunderstandings. These things can quietly block empathy from flowing. But when we choose to stay open, to ask, to listen, to learn, we expand our ability to connect across difference. We become bridge builders. And in a divided world, that might be the most important work we can do. Empathy is not a luxury. It's the heartbeat of human connection. It's how we build trust, deepen understanding, and create spaces where people feel safe enough to be real. Whether in our homes or our workplaces, empathy changes the conversation. It changes the energy. It changes lives. So let us listen not just with our ears, but with our hearts. Let us speak not just to be heard, but to understand. And let us meet each other in that sacred middle ground, not with judgment, but with grace. Because when empathy leads, communication heals. And when communication heals, so do we. Chapter 7. Mastering Emotional Regulation in Interpersonal Dynamics. The journey to mastering emotional regulation always begins in the quiet, often uncomfortable space of emotional self-awareness. Without first understanding what we feel and why we feel it, any attempt to regulate those emotions will always be surface level at best, like trying to calm a storm you don't see forming. Emotional regulation is not simply about calming ourselves down or holding ourselves back. It starts with a more courageous act, being willing to see ourselves clearly. Not just in the easy moments, but especially when we feel triggered, hurt, misunderstood, or on edge. It's one thing to name our emotions, frustration, sadness, joy, fear, but it's another to explore their origins with honesty. Are we angry at what was said in the moment? Or are we reacting to something deeper? Perhaps an old insecurity, a long-standing fear of not being enough, or the sting of past rejection resurfacing. Sometimes what appears to be indifference is really emotional shutdown, a protective response when we no longer feel safe to be vulnerable. And sometimes our irritation with others is actually frustration with ourselves. Unacknowledged expectations, unmet needs, or stories we've been telling ourselves for years without realizing it. Developing emotional self-awareness means stepping into that internal landscape, not with judgment, but with curiosity. It means slowing down enough to notice what's really happening beneath the surface and recognizing the patterns that guide our reactions. Especially in high-stakes or emotionally charged conversations, this self-understanding becomes our compass. Without it, we are more likely to lash out impulsively, misinterpret the intentions of others, or say things we regret. But with it, we gain the power to pause, to check in with ourselves, and to choose responses that align not with our momentary frustration, but with our long-term values and relational goals. The truth is, emotional regulation is not about pretending to be calm or suppressing how we feel. It's not about pushing our emotions down until they vanish. In fact, unexpressed emotions don't disappear. They just find other ways to surface, often in passive-aggressive behavior, resentment, or emotional exhaustion. Real emotional regulation is about managing our responses intentionally. It's the art of holding our emotions with enough space and self-respect that we don't let them control us, but we also don't deny them. Sometimes that regulation looks like a breath, a simple inhale and exhale that creates just enough distance between the stimulus and our reaction. Other times, it looks like walking away from a conversation to gather ourselves, or journaling our thoughts before speaking them out loud. It could mean expressing disappointment without placing blame, or asserting a boundary with clarity and grace rather than with coldness or hostility. It's not about being emotionless, it's about being emotionally responsible. And this practice is exactly that, a practice. Like a muscle, emotional regulation grows stronger with repeated, intentional use. Over time, the reactions that once hijacked us lose their grip. We become better at recognizing our emotional triggers and more skillful at choosing what we say, how we say it, and when to say it. The more we work with our emotions rather than against them, the more resilient and trustworthy we become in our relationships. This emotional steadiness is never more essential than in moments of conflict. Because conflict, as inevitable as it is in any meaningful relationship, tends to pull emotional intensity to the surface. It pushes our buttons, ignites our defenses, and tempts us to speak before thinking, or withdraw when we most need to engage. But when we've developed the skill of emotional regulation, we can meet conflict with clarity rather than chaos. We don't have to deny our hurt or pretend we're unaffected, but we do gain the power to respond from our values instead of our wounds. Picture a disagreement spiraling out of control. Voices raised, tension mounting, assumptions flying like darts. In those moments, the easy path is reactivity. But what if one person paused, grounded themselves, and responded differently? What if, instead of matching the volume, they softened their tone? Instead of accusing, they named the emotion in the room or expressed a desire to understand. That single act of emotional regulation can shift the entire energy of the interaction. It invites the other person out of defensiveness and into dialogue. It says, I care about this enough to stay steady. I'm not here to win. I'm here to connect. That's the heart of emotional regulation. It's not the avoidance of strong feelings, but the conscious stewardship of them. When one person maintains composure, they often create space for the other to recalibrate too. This doesn't mean sacrificing your needs or burying your truth. It simply means choosing how and when to express it in a way that builds bridges rather than burns them down. In this way, emotional regulation becomes an act of respect, not just for the other person, but for the relationship itself. And yet, to truly regulate our emotions, we must also grow our capacity to feel them fully. This is the often overlooked part of the process: emotional tolerance. It's the ability to sit with discomfort without rushing to escape it. Whether it's the tension of a difficult conversation, the sting of honest feedback, or the vulnerability of expressing a need, emotional discomfort is part of being human. But too often, we try to sidestep it. We distract ourselves, numb out, get defensive, change the subject, anything to avoid what feels heavy or awkward or raw. But emotional regulation asks something braver. It asks us to stay, to breathe through the discomfort instead of bypassing it, to recognize that the discomfort itself isn't a threat. It's a signal, a guide. Sometimes it's even a doorway to deeper connection. When we can tolerate those feelings, shame, fear, anger, grief, we gain the strength to process them with clarity instead of denial. Let's say a team member publicly criticizes your work during a meeting. Your first instinct might be embarrassment, maybe anger, maybe a desire to shut down or retaliate. But with regulation and tolerance, you can notice that wave of emotion without getting swept away. You can acknowledge the sting, name it internally, and decide whether and how to address it. You might speak up calmly in the moment, or you might wait, process, and revisit the conversation later. Either way, you've reclaimed your agency. You've responded from choice, not from emotional autopilot. This kind of inner strength, being able to hold space for your emotions without letting them hijack your voice, is what sets emotionally intelligent people apart in both personal and professional settings. It's not perfection, it's presence. It's not about avoiding hard conversations. It's about showing up for them with compassion for yourself and for the other person. Learning to tolerate emotional discomfort is not about becoming indifferent. It's about building the strength to stay present when everything inside us wants to run. Whether it's the sting of embarrassment, the pressure of judgment, or the ache of disappointment, uncomfortable emotions have a way of making us flinch. But when we cultivate emotional tolerance, we give ourselves a gift, one that allows us to remain grounded, composed, and intentional, even in moments of emotional intensity. Rather than reacting defensively to feedback or withdrawing from a hard conversation, we sit with that internal discomfort, knowing it will pass. We breathe through it, honor it, and choose our response from a place of clarity. Maybe we even thank the other person for their honesty. Maybe we say, "That's difficult to hear, but I appreciate you bringing it up." In that moment, we protect the relationship while honoring our growth. And that choice, repeated over time, expands our emotional resilience, deepens our maturity, and transforms us into stronger, steadier communicators. Emotional regulation doesn't just shape our private inner world. It deeply influences how we show up for others. It affects the space we hold, the presence we offer, the attention we give. When our inner emotional landscape is flooded with anxiety, anger, or distraction, it becomes incredibly difficult to fully engage with another person's reality. We might nod while they speak, but miss the meaning behind their words. We might respond, but with tones and timing that don't match what they truly need. Emotional regulation opens space within us. It slows our thoughts, settles our bodies, and makes room for attunement. When we are calm and grounded, we become better listeners, not just to words, but to pauses, glances, shifts in breath, and all the subtle signals that reveal how someone really feels. This kind of presence is rare, and it's powerful. It says to the other person, "I'm not just hearing you, I'm with you." In this way, regulation is the foundation of empathy. It keeps us from projecting our stress onto others or misinterpreting their experience through the lens of our own unrest. It allows us to approach others with curiosity instead of control, with care instead of defensiveness. That ability to stay emotionally centered, especially in emotionally complex moments, makes all the difference in how deeply we connect and in how safe people feel in our presence. Nowhere is this more vital than in situations involving power dynamics. Whether we're in a position of leadership, mentoring someone younger, parenting, or navigating difficult negotiations, the emotional tone we bring into the room has weight. When we hold authority, our emotions echo louder. A sharp comment from a manager can demoralize a team. An outburst from a parent can leave a lasting mark. But when we regulate ourselves, when we model calm under pressure, we build environments of safety, dignity, and trust. We show others what maturity looks like, not because we suppress our emotions, but because we've learned how to own them without being owned by them. In leadership, emotional regulation allows us to offer feedback without humiliation, to respond with steadiness even in crisis, and to navigate disagreement without escalating tension. It means keeping our insecurities in check, knowing that ego, fear, and unspoken stress can easily bleed into our words if we aren't aware. In high-stakes conversations, negotiations, conflict resolution, or delicate mentoring moments, regulation helps us stay focused on the outcome, not just the emotion. It grants us the presence of mind to listen actively and advocate firmly without aggression. Navigating power responsibly requires that we become guardians of our emotional impact, modeling the very emotional intelligence we wish to inspire in others. The beautiful truth about emotional regulation is that it's not reserved for the few. It is a learnable skill. Thanks to the brain's remarkable neuroplasticity, we are capable of reshaping our emotional responses with consistent practice. And that practice can begin with small, intentional tools like mindfulness, journaling, breathwork, and body awareness. Each of these practices strengthens our capacity to notice emotional patterns without judgment, to slow down the loop of reactivity, and to shift from unconscious habit to conscious choice. Mindfulness teaches us to observe our emotions as passing events rather than as identities we must defend. Journaling invites us to unpack emotional experiences with honesty and clarity, helping us see what we truly felt, why it was triggered, and how we want to move forward. Deep, rhythmic breathing calms the nervous system, slows the heart rate, and signals safety to the brain. Over time, these practices literally reshape the brain, quieting the amygdala, which is responsible for fear and fight or flight reactions, and strengthening the prefrontal cortex, which governs self-control, decision-making, and empathy. The result? We become less reactive and more responsive. We create more space between trigger and choice. We start to experience emotions as useful messengers instead of dangerous enemies. And this shift, subtle but profound, changes everything, from the quality of our relationships to the way we lead, love, and communicate. Consider how this plays out in real life. In romantic relationships, a careless remark or a missed expectation can easily lead to escalation. But if even one person pauses and says, "I feel hurt that you canceled without telling me," rather than accusing, "You never respect my time," the entire interaction softens. Blame dissolves. Connection opens. In the workplace, a supervisor receiving difficult feedback might feel an instinctive rush of defensiveness. But with regulation, they might respond, "Thank you for your honesty. I'd really like to understand more." That response doesn't just keep the conversation going. It builds trust. In a family setting, a parent dealing with a teenager's outburst may feel triggered, perhaps even disrespected. But if that parent can regulate their reaction, they might instead say, "It sounds like something's really upsetting you. Want to tell me about it?" That moment becomes a bridge, not a breakdown. These examples show us that emotional regulation doesn't eliminate emotion, it channels it. It allows us to express our truth in a way that invites connection rather than conflict. It turns hard moments into healing ones. It transforms conversations that could break relationships into conversations that strengthen them. Because in every setting, romantic, professional, familial, our ability to manage our emotional state determines whether we build walls or build bridges. And the rewards of mastering this skill reach far beyond any single interaction. As we become more emotionally regulated, we become more grounded in who we are. We stop letting fleeting emotions hijack long-term goals. We respond to life's challenges with steadiness, not with panic. We show up with clarity, even when life feels messy. Over time, this steadiness becomes part of our character. It becomes a quiet strength that people trust, lean on, and admire. More importantly, it becomes a gift we give to ourselves. Emotional regulation is a declaration of self-respect. It says, "I am not a prisoner to my emotions. I am capable of feeling deeply without losing myself." And that self-trust radiates outward. It makes us better partners, better parents, better leaders, and better friends. It invites others to feel safe in our presence, safe to be real, to be vulnerable, to be human. Ultimately, the ability to regulate our emotions is not about control. It's about connection. It's not about holding back. It's about showing up with integrity, presence, and care. When we master emotional regulation, we don't become emotionless. We become emotionally powerful. And in a world that often feels chaotic and loud, that kind of quiet strength is revolutionary. Chapter 8. Decoding the Unspoken, Mastering Nonverbal Communication. In every conversation we have, whether it's with a loved one, a colleague, or a stranger at the grocery store, there is another layer unfolding beneath the spoken words. A silent exchange, a deeper current. This undercurrent is not shaped by vocabulary or grammar, but by something far more instinctive and revealing. Nonverbal communication. The way we tilt our heads, shift our posture, move our eyes, cross our arms, or lean into a conversation all send messages, sometimes more honest than our words ever could. This is the language beneath language, the realm of subtle physical signals that often speak louder than our voices. And while we might think we're fully in control of the impressions we give, body language tends to operate in the background, involuntarily revealing emotions we may not even be aware of. Our shoulders may tighten when we're anxious, our breath may quicken when we're excited, or our eyes may narrow slightly when we feel skeptical, all before a single word escapes our lips. Understanding this hidden dialogue is not about decoding some secret codebook where every gesture has a single meaning. True mastery of nonverbal communication is not found in memorizing one-size-fits-all interpretations like crossed arms mean defensiveness, or looking up to the left means lying. Instead, it's about becoming a student of nuance. It's about developing the ability to observe in context with empathy and curiosity. Social intelligence isn't built on snap judgments. It's built on pattern recognition, awareness of baseline behavior, and an openness to ask deeper questions. For example, one person might fidget when bored, while another fidgets when overwhelmed. A friend might bite their lip when they're nervous, while a colleague does so when deep in thought. Reading body language well isn't about projecting meanings onto people. It's about noticing shifts in their energy, comparing present behavior to their usual tendencies, and gently asking yourself, what might they be feeling right now? Is their body telling a different story than their words? This level of observation opens doors that words often leave closed. It allows us to tune into emotional subtext. Those feelings of uncertainty, disconnection, joy, or resentment that may never be explicitly voiced but that live in facial expressions, in the tension of a jaw, in the rhythm of a breath. When we learn to notice these cues with empathy, we become better communicators, better partners, and better listeners. And yet, decoding body language is only one half of the equation. The other half is attunement, a more powerful and more subtle skill. Attunement is not just about recognizing what someone else is feeling. It's about stepping into that emotional space with them. It's about allowing our own body language, tone, and presence to respond to theirs in a way that says, I see you, I'm here with you. Attunement goes beyond observation into the realm of connection. It's not mechanical. It's not about mimicking someone's gestures or parroting their tone. Instead, it's a kind of emotional resonance where your body naturally reflects theirs, not because you're trying to manipulate them, but because you're deeply present. In emotionally charged moments, this mirroring creates a phenomenon known as limbic resonance, a kind of neurological synchrony where both people begin to feel emotionally aligned, safer, more connected. Imagine a friend who is grieving, speaking softly with tears in their eyes. An attuned response doesn't rush to offer solutions. It doesn't try to fix or explain. It simply leans in, slows down, softens. Your tone lowers, your expression shifts, and your whole posture communicates. You're not alone. In more intense conversations, like a business negotiation, attunement might look like sitting with an open posture, maintaining soft but steady eye contact, nodding slightly to show engagement without aggression. These small cues make a big difference. They create an atmosphere of psychological safety that words alone cannot generate. Of course, attunement must be sincere. People have an extraordinary ability to sense inauthenticity. When someone is trying to appear emotionally present without truly being present, it feels hollow, or worse, manipulative. If our tone is off, or if our eyes contradict our smile, or if our body feels guarded while our words feign warmth, the incongruence is obvious. and nothing erodes trust faster than a person whose verbal message doesn't match their nonverbal one. On the flip side, when our nonverbal behavior is congruent with genuine care, it becomes magnetic. The person we're with begins to feel deeply seen and emotionally held, not just for the story they're telling, but for how that story is affecting them. And in that shared emotional space, conversation becomes more fluid, connection more profound, and trust more natural. In this state, our own bodies become instruments for relational tuning. We feel more than we analyze. We respond more than we strategize. We participate in a living dialogue of presence, empathy, and shared humanity. But here's the part we often overlook. Nonverbal communication is not universal. It's deeply shaped by culture, context, and personal history. What's considered respectful or warm in one culture might be interpreted as disrespectful or intrusive in another. A direct gaze might signal honesty in one community and rudeness in another. A smile might mean happiness for one person, while for another, it's a socially conditioned mask to hide discomfort or pain. Even within the same cultural group, individuals differ dramatically. Upbringing, trauma, temperament, and neurological diversity all shape how we express ourselves without words. Some people use big, expressive gestures, while others are subtle and restrained. Some wear their emotions openly on their face. Others keep them hidden in their posture or gaze. To assume that we can interpret everyone's body language the same way is not just simplistic, it's potentially damaging. Socially intelligent communicators know this. They don't rely on universal rules. They approach each interaction with humility and curiosity. They ask themselves not just, what does this mean? But what does this mean for this person, in this moment, within this relationship? That question invites understanding rather than assumption. It leaves room for difference. It honors complexity. And so, to truly decode the unspoken, to become fluent in the silent language beneath every conversation, we must practice two things in tandem: precise observation and embodied empathy. We must notice without judging, reflect without projecting, mirror without manipulating. Only then can we begin to understand others, not just by what they say, but by how they feel when they say it. Only then can we hear the whole conversation. Navigating differences with curiosity and respect. To master nonverbal communication is to understand not just the universal tendencies of the human body, but to appreciate the vast diversity within those tendencies. One of the most important truths we must carry with us is this: not every gesture, gaze, or posture means the same thing for every person. In fact, some of the most common interpretations of body language can completely mislead us if we don't consider the broader context of someone's life, personality, and neurobiology. Take eye contact, for example. In some cultures, maintaining eye contact is seen as a sign of confidence, sincerity, and respect. In others, it can be considered disrespectful or even confrontational. And in the realm of neurodivergence, particularly among individuals with autism or ADHD, avoiding eye contact is not a sign of evasion or rudeness. It's simply a way to reduce sensory overload or manage internal discomfort. For many neurodivergent individuals, looking someone in the eyes while simultaneously processing their words and body language can feel overwhelming, even painful. Similarly, people who carry histories of trauma may exhibit nonverbal cues that defy conventional interpretation. A raised voice may not signal aggression to the speaker. Perhaps it's just passion or excitement. But to the listener whose nervous system has learned to brace for danger at any sign of escalation, that volume may feel like a threat. Their response might be to flinch, shut down, freeze, or withdraw. Without an understanding of their story, we might misread their quiet as passive aggression or disinterest, when in truth it's a survival reflex rooted in experience. This is why developing fluency in nonverbal communication requires more than sharp observation. It demands humility. It requires us to put down the lens of assumption and pick up the lens of curiosity, instead of jumping to conclusions like, they must be upset with me, or they're obviously lying. A socially intelligent person pauses and asks a more generous question. What might this signal mean in the context of this person's experience? That question changes everything. Instead of treating people like puzzles to be solved or behaviors to be decoded, we begin to meet them where they are. We recognize that body language, like spoken language, has dialects, shaped by culture, shaped by neurobiology, shaped by emotional conditioning. What might look like defensiveness in one person could simply be a baseline posture in another. What might look like disinterest could actually be focused listening, filtered through a different behavioral expression. To read body language well, we must become pattern observers rather than snap interpreters. A single gesture rarely tells the whole story, but a change in someone's typical pattern often does. For example, if someone always speaks with arms crossed and shows open engagement through tone and eye contact, crossing their arms likely isn't defensive, it's just comfortable. But if they typically sit open and expressive and then suddenly pull back and cross their arms mid-conversation, that shift may signal something deeper: discomfort, withdrawal, or emotional retreat. These subtle shifts are not about the gesture alone. They're about what's changed in the moment. Emotional truth lives in the change. And reading that change accurately means you must first know what normal looks like for that person. You must be present often enough, aware enough to detect the quiet deviations that suggest inner movement. This is especially crucial in our globalized world. As workplaces, friendships, and communities become more culturally diverse, our sensitivity to nonverbal diversity must expand. What's considered normal physical distance in conversation, the acceptable use of touch, gestures of agreement or disagreement, the volume and pacing of speech, these all vary widely from culture to culture. A nod might mean yes in one context and "I'm listening" in another. A smile might express joy, politeness, submission, or even sarcasm, depending on cultural nuance. In these moments of cultural ambiguity, the most socially intelligent thing we can do is ask. Ask clarifying questions. Ask with respect. Ask with openness. For instance, "I noticed you seemed quieter today. Was anything bothering you?" Or "I'm not sure if I misunderstood. Was that okay with you?" These simple, gentle questions open the door to connection. They show we're paying attention, not just to content, but to experience. And they give the other person room to clarify rather than be misinterpreted. Cultural fluency is not about mastering hundreds of body language rules across every group. It's about becoming attuned to the possibility that there are differences and respecting those differences as valid and worthy of understanding. It means knowing that what feels off to you might feel perfectly natural to someone else, and that your interpretation is not the only one that matters. By approaching nonverbal communication with this mindset, we don't just avoid miscommunication, we cultivate deeper empathy. We learn to look beyond the surface, to honor the full humanity behind the gestures. And we recognize that sensitivity is not weakness, it's a superpower. It's a strength that allows us to hold space for a broader range of human expression, emotion, and identity. In doing so, we create environments where people feel seen not just for what they say, but for who they are. We allow our relationships, whether personal or professional, to be shaped not by assumption, but by awareness, not by projection, but by presence. And in that presence, we unlock the truest form of understanding, not perfect knowledge, but mutual respect. Ultimately, the goal of decoding the unspoken is not to become mind readers. It's not to gain control over others through clever tricks or body language analysis. The real goal is to connect authentically, compassionately, and inclusively. It is to become the kind of person who listens with their whole body, who sees what others miss, who responds not just to words, but to hearts. That kind of presence changes everything. It turns simple interactions into moments of meaning. It turns conversations into connection. And it turns relationships into spaces where both people can show up fully, freely, and without fear of being misunderstood. Chapter 9. Emotional Currents: Recognizing, Managing, and Responding to Others' Emotions. Genuine social intelligence begins where most people stop, beneath the surface of spoken words and observed behavior. It asks us not only to see people, but to feel with them, to tune in to the unspoken emotional energy that colors every interaction. Conversations are not simply the exchange of facts or opinions. They're emotional ecosystems, subtle, shifting, and deeply shaped by what remains unsaid. Every person carries an emotional tone into the room, a kind of invisible weather that swirls between words. You can feel it when someone enters your space smiling, yet their body is tense and their eyes betray something deeper. Or when someone speaks gently, yet their words seem to hum with repressed frustration. These emotional undercurrents are often more honest than the words themselves, and more influential in shaping the direction and outcome of our relationships. To recognize these invisible cues is to step into a deeper realm of human connection, but it requires both intention and sensitivity. Emotional awareness is not passive. It's active listening with the whole body. It means paying attention to micro-expressions that flicker and vanish within a second. It means noticing how someone's breath shifts when a certain topic comes up. It means sensing the tightening in someone's voice, the sudden shift in pace or tone, and interpreting not as facts, but as signals. Yet this level of awareness demands inner clarity. If we are too distracted, reactive, or emotionally entangled ourselves, we'll likely misread others, projecting our own turmoil onto their energy. That's why the foundation of emotional awareness is internal stillness, a kind of emotional quietness that makes room for the presence of others. We become listeners not just to their words, but to their emotional frequency. And in doing so, we begin to sense when something isn't quite right, even if everything seems fine on the surface. We begin to recognize when the heart is guarded, when the soul is tired, when someone is hiding behind pleasantries because they don't feel safe enough to show what's real. But this is not about exposing people or analyzing them. It's about creating space. When people feel that their emotional truth is safe with us, that we see them without judgment, without the need to fix or interrogate, something opens. Truth flows more freely. Connection deepens. Vulnerability is met not with shame, but with compassion. And that's the power of emotional awareness. It offers others the permission to be honest. It offers them the chance to be fully human in our presence. It says, you don't have to pretend here. I see you. I'm listening. That's not weakness. That's relational strength of the highest kind. Because real connection doesn't live in logic. It lives in emotional reality. And those who can recognize it have access to the deepest levels of trust, meaning, and transformation. But recognizing emotional undercurrents is only half the equation. The other half is how we respond to them. And that begins with self-regulation. When emotions run high, whether in conflict, in crisis, or simply in moments of pressure, our nervous system often takes the wheel before our rational brain has a chance to catch up. We might lash out, shut down, withdraw, or say something we later regret. These aren't moral failures. They're untrained emotional reflexes, reactions that emerge when we haven't developed the pause between stimulus and response. Emotional regulation is that pause, that sacred, empowering moment when we notice what's rising within us and choose not to be swept away. It's the breath before the reply, the grounding moment that keeps us from mirroring chaos with chaos. And it's not a skill we're born with. It's one we build, slowly, imperfectly, intentionally. It begins with knowing ourselves. What words sting us more than others? What tones trigger our defenses? What conversations cause our body to tense before a word is even spoken? These emotional triggers are not signs of weakness. They are clues to what we've carried. But once we see them clearly, we can learn to hold them rather than be ruled by them. Through mindfulness, journaling, breathwork, and reflection, we build tools that help us stay calm in the storm. We don't shut down our feelings. We make space for them without letting them hijack the moment. We can be angry without becoming cruel. We can feel hurt without collapsing into silence. We can disagree without needing to dominate. That kind of emotional regulation doesn't make us less human. It makes us more trustworthy, more magnetic, more powerful in the best sense of the word. And that power changes how people experience us. In work settings, it builds credibility and leadership presence. In close relationships, it softens conflict into conversation. And in everyday life, it gives us the grace to meet difficulty without losing ourselves in the process. At its heart, emotional regulation is self-leadership, the steady hand that brings the best of who we are into every interaction, even when tested. But awareness and regulation are still incomplete unless we take the final step: emotional responsiveness. This is where emotional intelligence becomes action. It's the ability to meet people where they are, not where we wish they were, not where we think they should be, but exactly where they stand in that moment, emotionally. It's one thing to recognize that someone is frustrated. It's another to respond to that frustration in a way that actually helps. Often, we rush to offer solutions when someone shares pain. But most of the time, what people need isn't a fix, it's acknowledgement. I hear you. That sounds really hard. I can tell that meant a lot to you. These simple, emotionally attuned responses offer far more comfort than the most well-intended advice. When someone is joyful, they don't want your analysis. They want you to join them in that joy, to reflect it, to honor it. When someone is afraid, they need your calm, not your judgment. And when someone is overwhelmed, they need your grounded presence more than your explanations. This kind of responsiveness requires attunement. It means adapting our tone, pacing, and energy to meet the emotional state of the moment. If someone is anxious, logic alone might bounce off a closed mind. But warmth, patience, and calm can create enough safety for logic to land. If someone is spiraling emotionally, mirroring that intensity might escalate the situation. But choosing stillness, being the anchor, can help them find their footing. Emotional responsiveness is not about being fake or overly agreeable. It's about being skillfully human. It's about choosing the response that serves the moment rather than our ego. And yes, it requires effort. Emotional labor is real. It means managing our own reactions in order to create a better experience for someone else. But that effort often becomes the very thing that heals, that diffuses tension, that builds bridges where walls once stood. When people feel truly met, when their emotions are not just seen but honored, they feel safe, they feel valued, they feel loved. In workplaces, this turns managers into leaders. It creates cultures where people bring their full selves to the table. In friendships and families, it strengthens every bond. And in the quiet moments of life, it gives us the power to be the kind of person others can trust, turn to, and grow with. Practicing emotional responsiveness is not a destination, it's a lifelong refinement. But every time we succeed, we bring more empathy into the world, more presence, more healing. And ultimately, that's what social intelligence is about. Not just understanding people, but uplifting them. Chapter 10. Navigating difficult conversations, turning tension into trust. There is a moment, quiet and often internal, when we realize something must be said, but we don't yet know how to say it. It's not always a grand confrontation. Sometimes it's a sentence withheld at dinner, a message half-typed and deleted, a sigh that goes unnoticed. These are the beginnings of difficult conversations, not marked by conflict, but by weight, the emotional gravity of things left unspoken. Difficult conversations are not a failure in communication. They are often a sign that something matters deeply. We don't wrestle with how to talk to someone we don't care about. We wrestle with how to talk to someone whose opinion matters, whose presence is significant, whose absence we'd fear if the truth we speak drives them away. This is what makes these conversations hard. The stakes are human, not just verbal. Avoidance is a common but costly strategy. In choosing not to speak, we make room for distance to grow, and over time, that distance becomes harder to close. Silence can feel safer in the short term, but it slowly corrodes connection. And when we finally do speak, the pressure has built so high that it spills out as frustration, sarcasm, or blame. The way out isn't confrontation, it's preparation. Emotional preparation, intentional presence, clarity about what you feel and why you feel it. Because the truth alone is not enough. The delivery matters, the frame matters, the tone, above all, matters. Every emotionally charged conversation begins before words are spoken. It begins in the posture you bring. Are you entering with a need to prove or a desire to understand? Are you bracing for battle or holding space for complexity? The best conversations don't start with ultimatums. They start with curiosity. Can we talk? I've been sitting with something. There's something on my heart that I'd like to share. These phrases open doors, not slam them. They extend an invitation to meet in the middle. When you speak, speak from ownership. Use language that reflects your experience without assigning blame. Not, you always dismiss me, but I feel dismissed when I don't feel heard. This shift may seem subtle, but it's everything. One leads to defense, the other to reflection. Now pause and ask yourself, how is my tone landing? Because no matter how carefully you choose your words, if your tone carries bitterness, fear, or sarcasm, your message will be overshadowed. People hear tone before they hear content, and when tone feels unsafe, the walls go up. That's why emotional regulation is vital. It's not about denying your anger, sadness, or disappointment. It's about holding space for those emotions without letting them drive the conversation. Taking a breath before you speak. Pausing when emotions rise. Choosing presence over reaction. And when you've spoken, remember, your power is not only in your voice, it's in your ability to listen, to truly, deeply listen. This doesn't mean agreeing with everything the other person says. It means being willing to receive their reality, even when it doesn't match yours. Active listening is one of the most disarming tools we have. It turns a tense moment into a safe one. It says, I'm here. I'm not just waiting to talk. I'm here to understand. This is the doorway to transformation. Because when people feel heard, they soften. When they feel safe, they open. Of course, not all conversations will end in harmony. Some truths will sting. Some needs will remain unmet. But even then, when truth is offered with kindness and received with dignity, people can part with clarity rather than confusion, with respect rather than resentment. The hardest conversations often reveal the strongest relationships, not because they were easy, but because both people stayed present. They stayed engaged. They chose courage over comfort, connection over convenience. Let us remember, difficult conversations are not about being perfect. They're about being real. And when you choose realness, tempered by grace, guided by intention, you don't just navigate conflict. You build trust, one honest moment at a time. Chapter 11, The Art of Influence, Shaping Outcomes with Subtlety and Integrity. Sometimes influence doesn't come from the loudest voice in the room, but from the quiet presence that leaves others feeling respected, seen, and gently understood. Real influence, the kind that lasts, is not a forceful push or a clever scheme. It's the invisible current running beneath authentic relationships, a quiet yet powerful nudge that helps people move toward what they truly need, even if they don't realize it yet. That kind of influence is subtle, but it carries weight, it lingers, and more often than not, it transforms. Influence built on truth and care is not manipulation in disguise. It's an invitation to connection, to clarity, to alignment. When done well, it's not about bending others to your will, but about crafting conversations and choices where both people's needs matter, where your goals don't overshadow theirs, but are woven together into a shared outcome. This is the paradox at the heart of authentic influence. The less you try to control someone, the more space you create for trust to grow. And within that trust, transformation happens. But to reach that place, you have to begin where most never look, beneath the surface. Behind every behavior is a motive, and behind every motive is a need. Some people act from fear, others from longing, and many from stories they've carried for years without questioning them. The person in front of you isn't just reacting to you, they're responding to 100 moments that came before you. So true influence begins with listening, not just to words, but to patterns, to silences, to the way someone flinches or brightens, pauses or pushes back. It's only when we slow down and look through their lens that we begin to understand what really shapes their choices. And when you speak from that understanding, when your words reflect their values and goals, not just yours, that's when influence becomes meaningful. Not because you've outsmarted them, but because you've honored them. Subtlety becomes the soul of this process. Not whispering secrets or hinting with hidden motives, but simply offering enough space and stillness for insight to take root. The best influencers don't broadcast brilliance, they draw it out of others. They pose questions that stir something. They offer truths that don't demand agreement, but invite reflection. They speak not to dominate, but to awaken. And this isn't just an emotional dance, it's also deeply intellectual. Influence requires emotional literacy and cognitive agility. You're not just reacting, you're reading the room. You're interpreting what's unsaid. You're noticing the difference between someone nodding in agreement and someone truly leaning in. And when you do speak, you're not dropping a truth bomb. You're delivering something they're ready to hold. But for all this to work, one thing must sit at the center: trust. If someone doesn't trust you, they'll question your motives, guard their responses, and shrink away from your ideas, even the good ones. But when they do trust you, your words bypass their defenses and land where it matters. Trust is earned not in declarations, but in how you consistently show up. It's built when your tone matches your values and your intentions are visible in your behavior. It deepens when you take responsibility for your missteps, when you admit you don't know everything, when you let people see not just your strength, but your struggle too. Authenticity, then, is the most honest kind of persuasion. Not just being real, but being real in a way that respects the moment. It's not about dumping every thought you have. It's about aligning your truth with the emotional temperature of the room. Influence without authenticity is performance. Influence with authenticity is presence. And presence is what people remember long after they forget what you said. Once trust and authenticity are in place, the pathways to persuasion become clearer. Human nature follows certain patterns: reciprocity, social belonging, respect for authority, the pull of scarcity, the need for consistency. These aren't tricks. They're deep needs, quietly guiding behavior. And when we understand them, we don't exploit them, we honor them. Offering help before asking for something in return creates a natural flow of exchange. Showing that others trust you makes it easier for someone new to do the same. Communicating with quiet confidence gives your words gravity. Reminding people that some chances don't last forever helps them prioritize. And encouraging small first steps can often open the door to deeper commitments. But here's the line we never cross. These tools are never weapons. Influence is only real when it protects dignity on both sides. The moment we use someone's psychology against them, we lose not just their trust, but our own integrity. Every technique, no matter how powerful, must be anchored in care. Influence, at its highest level, is not persuasion, it's service. It's the gentle shaping of moments so people see themselves more clearly, act more bravely, and choose more wisely. If we do this well, something beautiful happens. People don't walk away feeling impressed by us. They walk away feeling empowered in themselves. And that is the true art of influence. At the end of the day, the greatest influence you will ever have is not in changing someone's mind, but in awakening their heart. When people feel safe in your presence, when your words don't just inform but affirm, you become a mirror that shows them their best selves. And in a world full of noise, manipulation, and shallow persuasion, being that kind of presence isn't just rare, it's revolutionary. So carry your influence not like a weapon, but like a light. Let it guide, not blind. Let it lift, not burden. And remember, you don't need to force anything to shape something beautiful. You just need to show up, true and steady, and let your presence do the quiet work that only truth can do. Chapter 12, Developing Empathy, the cornerstone of human connection. If there is a silent art that breathes life into every meaningful relationship, it is empathy. Not flashy, not loud, not insistent. Yet it works quietly beneath the surface, stitching people together in moments of pain, joy, uncertainty, and truth. We often think we understand empathy, that it's simply about feeling bad when someone else is suffering, or offering a comforting nod during hard times. But true empathy is far more profound. It isn't about pity, and it certainly isn't about passive sympathy. Empathy is presence. It's a willingness to step into someone else's emotional world, not to fix it or judge it, but to simply walk alongside it with full-hearted attention. At its essence, empathy asks us to leave our own mental chatter behind. It invites us to listen, not just with our ears, but with our hearts and intuition. It's the ability to feel what someone else is feeling without needing to drown in their emotions. It means looking beyond someone's words into the context behind them. Why do they feel this way? What past experiences, invisible pressures, or unspoken fears might be shaping what they're expressing? True empathy begins where assumptions end and curiosity takes over. Understanding empathy requires peeling back its layers. The first layer is cognitive. It's when we intellectually grasp what someone is experiencing. We put ourselves in their shoes, not to agree, but to understand. This layer demands intentional focus. It means paying close attention to words, tone, posture, and silences. We suspend judgment, we resist the need to insert our own story, and we allow space for theirs to unfold. But understanding alone isn't enough. Empathy deepens when it reaches our emotional core. Emotional empathy goes beyond the mental exercise of seeing through another's eyes. It's the internal resonance, the moment when you hear someone's grief or joy and feel a shift within yourself. It's not performance, it's connection. It's recognizing another's emotions in such a way that your heart beats in tandem with theirs, not out of obligation, but out of authentic care. This isn't about losing ourselves in their world. It's about meeting them there with our full presence. The most powerful expression of empathy, though, is compassionate empathy. It's not just seeing and feeling, it's being moved to act. Not with force, not with savior energy, but with a quiet commitment to support. Compassionate empathy is when we hold someone's hand through the dark, offer a steady presence in chaos, or simply sit in silence when no words can make it better. It transforms empathy from passive awareness into relational courage. Still, empathy is not a universal formula. It's shaped by context. In a workplace, it might mean acknowledging a colleague's frustration without defensiveness and offering meaningful assistance instead of judgment. In a personal relationship, it may look like holding someone through their grief without trying to fix it, just bearing witness to their pain. Regardless of setting, the essence remains. We must tune into people with sincerity, set aside distractions, and seek understanding beyond what is immediately visible. And at the heart of empathy lies one indispensable tool: active listening. It's easy to believe we're listening when we're really waiting for our turn to speak. But empathy doesn't live in rehearsed responses. It lives in presence. Active listening demands our full attention, undivided and non-judgmental. It's an act of generosity where we offer another person the rare gift of being fully seen. To truly listen is to quiet the noise within. We set aside the compulsion to fix, to interrupt, to compare. We show up. Eye contact, gentle nods, open body language, all signal our attentiveness. But it's more than physical cues. It's in the energy we bring, the sincerity that laces our tone, and the patience we offer. We listen not to reply, but to understand. When someone speaks from a place of vulnerability, active listening means we reflect back what we've heard, not as a test, but as a bridge. Saying something like, "It sounds like you're feeling overwhelmed and unsure of where to turn. Is that right?" This small act tells the other person, "I hear you, I see you, and your emotions matter." And when we respond with empathy, we don't need to fix the problem. Sometimes the most healing thing we can offer is validation. That sounds incredibly difficult. I can only imagine how heavy that feels. With these words, we don't diminish their struggle. We don't rush past their pain. We honor it. We hold space. Holding space is where empathy truly lives. It's where we set aside our need to solve and instead offer our steady presence. It's where we let others know they are not alone, not because we have answers, but because we're willing to stand with them in the not knowing. That willingness, that deep human commitment to understanding without agenda, is the seed from which trust, safety, and connection grow. Empathy is not a skill to be mastered. It is a presence to be embodied. It asks us to slow down, to be soft in a hardened world, to care even when we don't have the perfect words. And in doing so, it allows us to become what every soul longs to find, someone who listens not just to the voice, but to the truth beneath it. When we live with empathy, we don't just connect with others, we remind them and ourselves that we are never truly alone. Empathy is often imagined as something you either have or don't, a mysterious emotional gift that some are simply born with. But this view does a disservice to what empathy truly is, not a static trait, but a living, growing capacity. It breathes and expands through practice. And perhaps more importantly, it is cultivated in the quiet, unseen moments when we choose to understand before we judge, to feel before we dismiss, and to connect before we correct. Active listening, though already explored, is not the end of empathy's journey. It is its doorway. Once we listen with intention, we must step through that door and begin practicing the deeper skills that allow us not only to hear someone's words, but to resonate with their emotional truth. To empathize is not to perform, it is to embody. And that embodiment begins with the willingness to enter another person's emotional world without needing to rewrite it. Some individuals may seem naturally attuned to the emotional undertones of a room. They notice when someone's voice catches or when a smile doesn't quite meet the eyes. But even for those who struggle to sense those subtleties, there is hope. Empathy is not confined to intuition. It can be sharpened, developed, and refined through intentional choices and repeated acts of awareness. One of the most transformative practices for cultivating empathy is the act of perspective taking. While the phrase might sound clinical, its impact is anything but. It means pausing your own narrative, silencing your assumptions, and genuinely asking, what is it like to be them right now? What does the world look like through their eyes? These questions may seem simple, but they have the power to dismantle walls of judgment and open windows into human experience. When we make the effort to imagine someone else's thoughts, fears, and hopes, even if they differ radically from our own, we begin to dissolve the barriers that often isolate us. Our minds stretch, our hearts soften, and yet empathy doesn't end in imagination. It must be felt in the body as well. Emotional recognition is the skill that brings us closer to this felt experience. It asks us not just to understand, but to feel with others. It's in the twitch of an eyebrow, the tremble of a voice, or the hesitation before an answer. These nonverbal signals often tell us more than words ever could. Tuning into them is not about decoding a puzzle, it's about attuning ourselves to the emotional frequency of another human being. And the more we listen to these cues, the more fluent we become in the language of compassion. Still, none of this can flourish in a distracted or judgmental mind. That's where mindfulness enters as empathy's steady companion. Mindfulness, pure, uncluttered awareness, gives us the space to notice without reacting, to sit with discomfort without flinching. When we are mindful, we stop trying to rush to the next thing. We begin to notice our own emotional responses before they hijack the moment. And as we become more aware of our own internal weather, we can better shelter others through theirs. Kindness flows more freely when we are present to both our experience and theirs. There is also something profoundly humbling about stepping out of our own comfort and engaging in acts of service. Volunteering, or even simple gestures of generosity, allow us to step into the lived realities of people whose struggles we might never have otherwise understood. Service doesn't just help others, it stretches us. It forces us to shed our assumptions and witness the dignity and pain in others' stories. And in doing so, it reveals the common thread that ties us all together, the longing to be seen, supported, and not left alone in our suffering. And while we learn to give empathy outwardly, we must also learn to turn it inward. This is often the hardest part. So many of us are kinder to strangers than we are to ourselves. But self-compassion is not selfish. It is foundational. You cannot offer a well of empathy to others if yours is bone dry. When we are harsh with our own missteps, when we deny ourselves grace, we inevitably carry that hardness into our relationships. But when we learn to meet our own pain with tenderness, our hearts expand, creating room to cradle others with that same gentleness. In this way, empathy becomes more than a reaction. It becomes a mindset. It's a posture of curiosity, a readiness to understand before being understood. It is not about fixing people, nor is it about always agreeing with them. Rather, it's about witnessing without retreat, accompanying without rescuing. It is an invitation that says, "You're not alone. I see you. I'm here." When empathy is practiced daily, imperfectly, courageously, it changes more than conversations. It transforms lives. It heals wounds not with solutions, but with presence. It binds us not with sameness, but with shared humanity. And as we grow this capacity within ourselves, we begin to cultivate relationships rooted not in transaction, but in truth. In a world that often rushes toward judgment, empathy is the revolutionary act of choosing to care. And that choice, made over and over again, is how we build a world where everyone belongs. The most powerful change doesn't begin with a grand gesture. It begins with a quiet moment of empathy, the kind that asks nothing but gives everything, the kind that listens not just to reply, but to understand. If we choose to grow this gift within ourselves, we don't just become better people. We become the kind of presence that others trust, lean on, and remember. And in the end, that is the kind of legacy that matters, not what we achieved, but who we made feel understood along the way. Chapter 13, Conflict Resolution, Turning Challenges into Opportunities for Growth. Conflict. That word alone can summon a heavy silence in a room, a tightening in the chest, a flicker of old memories where arguments left wounds and misunderstandings turned into distance. We've all been there. But what if conflict, rather than being a threat to our peace, was actually an invitation, a door to deeper understanding, to growth, and even to stronger connection? What if, instead of avoiding it or bracing ourselves for a battle, we approached conflict as a kind of emotional dialogue, one that reveals what matters most to us and those around us? At its root, conflict isn't a sign of dysfunction. It's a sign that something important is at stake. Whenever two people care deeply, think differently, or operate from different emotional landscapes, conflict becomes inevitable. This doesn't mean anything is broken. It simply means we are human. But here's where it gets powerful. The nature of conflict is not defined by disagreement itself, but by how we choose to engage with it. When we bring awareness to the underlying emotional currents, unmet needs, bruised dignity, frustrated hopes, we begin to see the human story beneath the surface of tension. Often, it's not the facts that fuel the fire. It's the feelings. A disagreement about workload may mask a plea for recognition. A terse comment might hide years of suppressed resentment or pain. And unless we tune into those emotional frequencies, we may find ourselves locked in repeating cycles of frustration without ever understanding why. Emotional intelligence becomes our compass in these moments. It allows us not only to hear the words being said, but to feel the emotions that give those words weight. Without that compass, we risk missing the deeper meaning. But perspective changes everything. Two people can stand before the same event and walk away with radically different interpretations. Their life histories, cultural backgrounds, personal insecurities, and beliefs all shape how they see and experience the world. Recognizing this opens the door to compassion. When we stop assuming our view is the only valid one, we create space for connection. We begin to listen, not to debate, but to understand. And in that space, resolution becomes possible, not because someone has to win, but because everyone deserves to be seen. True conflict resolution is never about overpowering the other person. It's about building a bridge wide enough for both of you to stand on. This requires more than tactics. It requires a mindset that values understanding over victory, dialogue over dominance, and healing over hostility. It's not always easy. It takes patience, humility, and courage. But the payoff is profound, because when you resolve conflict with grace, you don't just fix a moment, you deepen a relationship. That's why active listening matters so much, and not the surface kind where you nod while thinking about your next point. Real listening, the kind where you lean into silence, make eye contact, and give someone the gift of your undivided attention. When someone feels truly heard, truly understood, their defenses soften. Suddenly, the tension doesn't feel like a war zone. It feels like a space where something honest can finally be said. Even if the conflict isn't resolved right away, just that feeling of being acknowledged shifts the energy dramatically. Language, too, has the power to soothe or inflame. We often underestimate this. The difference between saying, "You always ignore me," and "I feel ignored when this happens," can mean the difference between escalating a fight and starting a conversation. Shifting from accusation to vulnerability opens the door to mutual respect. It doesn't make your experience less valid, it makes it more accessible to the other person. And then there's the subtle art of reframing. When we take a heated accusation and rephrase it in a spirit of curiosity or shared purpose, we shift the terrain of the conversation. Saying, "Why do you never care about my opinion?" invites a very different response than, "I think we see this differently. Can we try to understand each other's viewpoint?" Reframing isn't about sugarcoating. It's about remembering that how we say something often determines whether it can even be heard. But perhaps the most underestimated tool in conflict resolution is common ground. In any disagreement, there is almost always something you both care about. Maybe it's the well-being of a team, the health of a family, or simply the desire to be treated fairly. When you can name and affirm that shared value, even if it's just one, you transform the conversation. You go from being opponents to being collaborators, partners searching for a solution that honors you both. Of course, this doesn't mean every conflict will end in perfect harmony. But the goal isn't perfection, it's progress. And when both people walk away feeling like their voice was heard, their needs acknowledged, and their dignity respected, then the conflict has served its purpose. It has become an instrument of growth. But conflict doesn't just test our strategies, it tests our emotions. Staying calm in the heat of the moment might be one of the hardest, yet most powerful, acts of personal leadership. It starts with recognizing your emotional triggers. When your heart races, when your palms sweat, when your jaw tightens, that's your body alerting you that a deeper wound may be surfacing. Don't ignore it. Tune in. Pause. A pause isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's the moment you reclaim your power to choose your response instead of being hijacked by your reaction. Take a breath. Step outside the whirlwind for a second. Gather yourself. What you do next can either build trust or tear it down. Sometimes our emotions get hijacked because we interpret everything as a personal attack. But what if it wasn't personal? What if it was about their fear, their need, their history? Reframing the meaning we assign to a conflict softens the emotional load. It allows us to shift from defense to curiosity. And from there, a much better path opens. Mindfulness helps immensely here. When practiced regularly, it strengthens your ability to stay grounded, even in turbulent conversations. You're more likely to notice your emotional shifts and less likely to get swept away by them. You become the calm in the storm, rather than the storm itself. And empathy. Empathy is the quiet superpower that makes everything else possible. When we see the humanity in the person across from us, their anger becomes easier to hold, their pain more understandable, and their position less threatening. This doesn't mean abandoning your own truth. It means holding space for theirs too. Resolving conflict doesn't mean stuffing down your feelings. It means honoring them in a way that leads to healing. It's not about surrendering your needs, but about asserting them in a way that invites cooperation. In the end, the goal of conflict resolution is not just peace, but understanding. Not just an agreement, but a stronger, more resilient relationship. And that is something truly worth striving for. If conflict has left scars on your heart, let this be your reminder. You are not broken. Every disagreement, every difficult conversation, every misunderstood word is a chance to rebuild something stronger than what was lost. It's in the fire of honest conflict that the steel of true connection is forged. You can rise above reaction. You can respond with clarity and grace. And in doing so, you don't just resolve problems, you lead, you grow, you heal. Let conflict be the place where your wisdom finds its voice and your empathy becomes your strength. The world needs more of that. The world needs more of you. As we reach the end of this journey together, take a moment to breathe in the quiet knowing that something within you has shifted. Maybe it's subtle, maybe it's profound, but the way you see others and yourself will never be quite the same. This has been Social Intelligence, the art of reading and responding to people. And if you've listened with your heart as much as your ears, then you've already begun to embody what this book was meant to awaken. From all of us at Booksounds, better you, thank you, truly. Thank you for your openness, your willingness to grow, and for taking the time to understand the human experience more deeply. It takes courage to examine yourself, to stretch your empathy, and to choose connection over control, compassion over judgment. Now comes the part that matters most, living it. Take what you've discovered here and let it shape the way you listen, the way you respond, the way you show up in the lives of others. Let it soften the sharp edges, open the locked doors, and illuminate the quiet corners of your relationships. You don't need to change the whole world, just your part of it. And sometimes that's more than enough. As you move forward, remember, every conversation is a chance to heal, every interaction a chance to understand. You have the tools, you have the insight, and most importantly, you have the heart. May you continue to connect deeply, lead gently, and love boldly. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and keep becoming the better you.